I'm Michael Fraser. I'm with the New Earth Network, and I'm here today with Ivan Tugakov with the book Cultura Rasa that compares biology to culture.
Yes, pretty much. And compares biology to matter and ties it all together. And we're going to be exploring a lot today about these concepts and beyond, about how social structures really work. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sitting with me.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
What I wanted to start with was because we have very common experiences that revolve around culture, right?
Okay. Yes.
So we have the experience of developing and watching culture emerge in environment of musical creativity within a restaurant that we were sharing space performing in, and so I'm very curious to know about that, talk about that element, the emergence of culture when we were together in those times.
It was a fundraiser, really. But there are live musical socials.
Yeah, so we were a part of a live, of a social...
You know when Ry Cooder went to Cuba,
Yeah.
he went seeking for the Buena Vista Social Club members.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why he sought them out is because they used to be known as people who used to run a scene back in the day that everybody used to go to.
Okay.
Right?
So we were a part of a scene.
It's a social. It's it's like a social club.
Yeah.
In fact, since 2020, I've learned that clubs are like sort of one of the catchphrases you can use with this kind of thing. It was a bit of a club, what was going on, like a kind of like a private, unique club that people were invited to, but it was in its own bubble, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I mean, I would say that you were integral to the cultural development of that club that we were a part of, and we saw it go through different stages, and people remember that as a serious benefit to our community development, right? And I guess I wanted to know about that and how you see that now, having done this research, looking at the social club that we were a part of developing. Why was that so special? How did that become what it was?
Right.
How can we recreate that, right? I mean, that's some of the efforts that you're a part of right now with some of the events that you've been doing, is recreating something of that similar nature, the feel that we had from it. It may not be the same, but I want to know about that. Like, how did we end up having something so special that was so impactful to people's culture? Like, even I met somebody the other day, a son of somebody who used to come to Chai Gallery that's an adult now, and he remembers it because it was impactful to him culturally.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
Cool.
So yeah, do you have any new perspective on that time that we went through in developing that social club?
Okay.
From the research that you
Okay. I'll be answering this as we go along.
Sure.
You can start.
I'm putting it out there.
Yeah. Because I want to set, as we start talking about the concepts, I'll refer to why that would be one of the examples.
Okay.
Of what we're talking about.
Okay, good. So then mark that, because what's most interesting to me about our conversation is that we've had different experiences over time, right? So there's that experience. Another experience that we've shared is the band, right? Mm-hmm. So, and you've had experiences before and after and seen how the culture develops differently. But there was definitely a period of time where it was me and you and a few other members where there was a significant culture that emerged. And it wasn't like immediate. It was developed because we played so many shows, and there was a synergy that we ended up having, right? That's not necessarily as easy as just like saying, I want to do this. There's a process, right, that we experienced in order to get there. So that's another one.
Yes, Chai Gallery was more, and it's okay, we'll use a term to reference it. Chai Gallery was more everyone involved, really.
Yeah.
Whereas the band structure is the band.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, also
And sure, the audience, perhaps, but the audience was coming and going.
Well, but
on where we
when
played.
I'm thinking of the band that when we were together in the band, there was a synergy that went into the traveling time, into the sound check time, into the performance time. Like, I mean, and then there was also like dynamics within the group too, like the dynamic between you and Pepe, the dynamic between the drummer and the bass player, John and Trevor, and myself and you. Like, we all filled different roles within this ecosystem that created the band. And then that in its whole was its own culture, right? Like, we would show up and people would feel our vibe as a band, right? And that different than the Chai thing, because the Chai thing wasn't necessarily about the band.
No.
It was like everybody was coming as individuals, right?
And these new events with different communities that we've been doing now is this pretty much the same format.
Every musician that's coming to play with you is showing up as an individual.
Yeah.
Right? They're not. There's a cohesion because you all play together, but it is similar to the Chai Gallery.
I will open this conversation right away up. I will open it up right away by saying that it really ultimately is no different than any other social group organized, whether it's a football team.
Yeah.
So you can say a football team, if they roll in with some high like skilled player, that they would roll into town or have dynamics amongst each other within that team, right? And then the Chai Gallery experience would be if people just gather in the neighborhood and everyone's coming down to kick the ball.
Yeah.
Right, and then something gets created out of that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, whatever the value system, which is what it usually revolves around, what the group revolves around, is going to set the parameters of what everyone's talking about. But ultimately, you're dealing with a bunch of people, and usually you have to have somebody. Who, to some degree, manages the thing. Because it's. But we can get into that as well as we open up the conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool.
And then the last stage, which is interesting because it's relevant to this time, I think it might be relevant to both the band and Chai Gallery, and I think it's relevant, at least for me personally within my own family, but it's the idea of the truth teller converging with the empire collapse.
Yes. Okay.
So you create this like you have this culture, right? So like there's the culture within my family, the culture within Chai Gallery, the culture within the band, all these things. And then there is this element right now that we're facing that's very topical of the truth telling becoming a part of the shift into something new. But it also creates an empire collapse. Like when people start telling the truth, it breaks the illusion of whatever the story we were telling ourselves about the culture becomes something different.
I'll put an asterisk on the collapse element because the collapse depends on the degree of the voices that you're talking about. So if there's like if there's one guy on the street screaming, you're being lied to.
Yeah.
He's the crazy guy on the corner.
Yeah.
If the whole nation is screaming, you're
Okay.
Right?
So I want to give context though, because the context of collapse is so the empire is like what we all thought was, right? So we all had the band, we were all thinking this is great, da da da. We all Chai Gallery, this is great, da da da. Family, great, da da da. But what the collapse is it's not necessarily like it's not about the truth teller that's on the corner. It's about the way that the empire reacts to the truth teller.
Sure.
And the collapse being the defending, the manipulating, the victimhood, the martyrdom, right?
All right.
That's the definition of collapse.
Okay.
Is like when...
So you're not talking about the actual thing collapsing, but their argument is collapsing.
No, I am talking about the thing collapsing. But so this is like a sort of psychological idea of you know, like you've got posturing where you're like, I'm the best and you're weak, and then you have collapse, like, oh, I'm defeated and, you know, I'm going to manipulate you to like get my way.
I do want to point out that it doesn't seem like there's much of collapse quite yet happening, at least not within Canada, when it comes to the mainstream narratives.
Well,
a lot of people
although they're manipulating.
Oh, no, that's...
And that would be, by definition, collapse, right?
Yes and no.
In that, if they were, I get what you're saying. Right. It's like it's both.
It's prone to collapse because it has a weak argument.
Totally.
But you can bullshit your way through things for years if you're good at it, right?
But there is that element of collapse that's coming out, right? Like, you know.
Yeah, I agreed.
Where when they are caught in a lie, right, that it ends up being that sort of like martyrdom thing, like, you know, you end up seeing the person on the news and they're like, you know, oh my gosh, woe is me, you know,
right.
like
that's right.
There is an element of this that's happening, but I think also in our own stories, like we've seen that too, right? Like I feel like you know, even in our differences, you and I, like, part of the reintegration of a new energy was, you know, from my standpoint, being really honest with how I was feeling about the situation.
Yeah, that's how we reconnected, really.
Well, I mean, but also
in some ways, there's different factors.
That was how we disconnected, but it was also the reason we could reconnect. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that we're just honest, you know? And so there's something about truth-telling that is really important to getting past where you are, so the empire may collapse, right? So that sort of that element you're disagreeing with me.
No. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing at all. I totally am agreeing with you.
No, but it doesn't matter.
I have so much to say about it already.
Okay.
That's what's happening.
Good. I see your mind working.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What I would say about that is how to start.
Yes.
I have a new definition of free will as a result of writing, working on this manuscript.
Okay.
Free will is usually kind of being dismissed as something that is kind of out of our control. You know, there's the whole reductionist where we have no control, but then people say you have free will, depends on this or that. I actually realized that free will is much simpler than to define than we would think. I think we overcomplicate the concept of free will.
Okay.
We can, if you want, before I answer all these questions, I'd like to set the stage by explaining some of the concepts. What do you think? Or do you want to talk about that?
Let me know about the free will thing, and then let's do that.
Free will is contained within the whole scope of the. But I'll explain. Okay. I will explain.
Just so I can even get it.
Free will. Okay, and this is where culture. The free will is not culture. Mm-hmm. Okay, first of all, I'll start off by saying that when I start using the word, say, free will, you might use a different word to describe the concept. Okay, so
you say free will, I say free willy.
Whatever
sinks your ship. Whatever sinks your ship.
Whatever cranks your crank. You know. Exactly. So when I say free will, I say any expression, especially if it's used very often, I'd like to define it first between ourselves so that we can be on the same page in terms of the context. Yeah. I don't care what words or expressions we use ultimately. Okay. Yeah. But I think I'm going to be able to explain this fairly straightforwardly. Okay. A free will is anything that your biology, that your genetics, that the expression of your genetics is asking you to do.
Okay.
Okay?
Free will is anything that your genetics expresses you to do.
Yeah.
So what's an example of that?
I need to go pee.
Okay.
I feel like going for a walk.
Okay.
I'm not going to listen to that person telling me what to do.
Okay.
Okay?
So your body is telling you that this is the response that you are inclined to have.
It's the expression of your needs. The way you want to express them. Now, it gets muddled very quickly because culture is not free will.
Okay.
Culture is an external force of sorts, and I treat culture as a force just as much as I would treat, a car moving in that direction as a specific force. I treat cultural phenomena as literal forces because technically, and this is sort of what I show through my writing, that they're literally a force.
Wow.
Okay? So there's a force being enacted upon you, and it's being enacted upon in the form of roles that you play for the society. Okay? Now, free will versus roles is how I think of it. And this is why I was kind of nodding around when earlier we were saying that truth will create a collapse of the empire, because truth for whom? For your own self, or the truth for the role that you're playing for the society?
Oh, interesting.
Okay? So and roles, what's also interesting about roles, when it comes to free will, no one can substitute you for you. But when it comes to societal roles, if you don't want to play the role, you'll get kicked out and somebody's going to be placed into that role and continue functioning in that context of that societal system. And furthermore, now we're opening up cans of worms, right? Furthermore, once you have that role set up, once you have the system, cultural system set up with everyone having to abide by the roles that they've been assigned to, there's nothing to suggest that people, have to be happy in that system. They can be straight up miserable for the rest of their lives, the entirety of their lives, which is the concept of martyrdom in a lot of, religious cultures. There's nothing to... there's nothing to be said that any of it has to bear truth within it, even necessarily. As long as the cultural system is maintained, truth doesn't even necessarily have to matter. What matters is you just do your role. You might be literally disagreeing and miserable throughout the whole process. Okay?
So a role, for example, would be like fatherhood, right?
Yes.
That's a role.
That's right. That's why the whole concept of marriage is not just, and this is where I think the West has pared it out to a point that it has become very confusing to understand, because for me, the concept of marriage is not two people, it's two families, and families are groups, and within the groups of families, especially if they're very traditional, everyone knows their role. And when you get married, you have a list of things that you have to abide by for the rest of your life in order to maintain the role for the rest of your life. If you don't feel being married, 30 years down the line, all of a sudden, that's free will. And the culture might say, no, you don't do that. You have to fulfill the role that's assigned by your culture onto you, and you better like it, or you better find a way to like it. We can discuss the outcomes of this. I'm just setting the stage for the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And the way I've arrived at this whole thing was by observing. I did a. There's so much. There's so much to say.
So maybe what you can do, if we can go over the fundamental aspects, like, for example, roles, right?
Yes.
So, like, if you were to simplify and take me through the foundation principles, like, and roles seems like a foundational principle to me, right? Mm-hmm. Can you do that for me?
Yes. So roles. The reason here, I'll use the map.
Yes.
Shall I try to use the
please.
map?
Yeah.
So I've created the map that really what I wanted to do is I'll open this up and then I'll tie it back into all of it, and then we go back to the social systems of everything.
Exactly.
And the reason why I have I want to draw this to the cover, which I actually, this is what I did.
And so what's the meaning of this?
Okay, so it's the way I wanted to understand the whole system is to look at the entire system. Okay. The reason why I call this the Big Bang is that everything that became ever since the Big Bang. So this babushka, if you put all of these inside of this babushka here, that'll be everything. Okay? So I was thinking, okay, what is within this big system? Within this big system, there's certain entities within that system that are involved in certain things that if you take it one babushka up, the entities outside are not involved in that system, right? So, for example, right off the top, whatever happened before the Big Bang is contained within this one. Yeah. Ever since Big Bang happened, we have elementary particles, and elementary particles are so ridiculously consistent. Like the atom just doesn't change. It never changes.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a consistency. But atom on its own, floating out there somewhere in the space, is not involved really in anything if it's just floating on its own in space as like as a meteor or whatever, or on its own, which begs the question whether it's even possible. So then...
The interesting thought that just came up for me is that you're talking about the atom being the first thing out of the Big Bang, and it makes me think of Adam and Eve, of like, I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
Yeah, that's semantics.
No, but it's just something that was like, wow, I never went through the progression of that's the first thing that would be like consistent after the Big Bang.
There is a point, even though it semantically matches, there is a point down the line around here somewhere where the concept of atom actually, you can plug it in. That's what I wanted to do, because culture is all about different concepts, especially the stuff like I find that a lot of the Western cultures are trying to throw everything out with the baby with the bathwater. They're saying, well, because we've decided there's no man up sitting in the cloud, that means that everything that these books are writing are just completely useless, right? And that is just one way of looking at it, but the way I see it is that there's a reason why all of these concepts evolved. There's a reason why, and it all comes out of it all comes out of human needs. But I'm rushing ahead of the story. So then what happens?
And that's okay. I think that's fine. Like if you go and you jump around and then come back,
I will.
I think that's a good thing for us to do, because that's how we're going to get really interesting nuggets of like story and stuff.
There's so much. I mean, the troubling thing with this whole thing, and you can see it in the actual image, is that it gets exponential. The moment you start unpacking things, it goes in all sorts of direction, and if you're not careful to stay on track, that's why it took me 5 years to finish this thing, because I wanted to gain like kind of the general picture of it, and then you can nitpick at each one of those topics and explore it as much as you want. But what I was really doing is that there's at some point down the line here, as elementary particles connected, here I'll actually zoom in on this one, as elementary particles started combining into composite particles and then into elements themselves. That's the thing, elementary particles are not even atoms yet.
Oh, okay.
Right, elementary particles are the bosons and all the little smaller things, which as I open up the book later, you'll see, if you look into it, that's when I'm actually exploring. Hang on, where is it? So these are the elementary particles that that make the nucleus only, right? Yeah. So I wanted to build it really from the ground up. From the ground up. Let me just put this here so that it's visible. I can't move it around. Okay. But what I was the reason why I did this entire project before I continue with this track is that the world of life, biological life, has a cycle. Yeah. In fact, the world of elementary particles has a cycle. So each one of these, the blue world, the green world, I'll actually switch to this now. The blue world, the green world, and cultural worlds all have some kind of a cycle happening regularly.
So the blue world is matter?
Matter cycle is the rain, the water evaporates up, turns into vapor, then vapor up there turns into water back, and that's your cycle.
Okay. So you got a cycle of matter.
Yeah.
Then you have a cycle of life.
And the cycle of life, there's many. There's ones where you take a breath in. Okay. You breathe in. The oxygen gets absorbed into your body, does its thing. Yep. You breathe out, right? And then whatever happens to, whatever you breathe out happens out there. And then you have to breathe in again. And that's just one cycle. And you keep doing it your entire life, right?
And it could be related exactly the same to what you were talking about, water and falling and evaporating.
That's essentially what cycle. Exactly. So a lot of people would say you shouldn't compare different systems. And I'm thinking, well, from the context of repetitiveness, you can totally compare them, right? And there's no reason why not to think about what happens within the system that is being replicated. Because if you think about it, if you and I did not know every word, English word, that you and I are using right now, we wouldn't be able to communicate right now. And the interesting part here is that the process of learning, which is the parenthood process, educational process, is the process of teaching young, growing humans, the vocabularies, everything that they knew, and that process itself is also repetitive until it's locked in, and then it's defined. Right. So what I've realized is that the cultures also have their own cycles that define specific behaviors, specific belief systems, specific all of these value systems are defined.
What would be an example of the breath or the water evaporating when it comes to culture?
You wake up in the morning, you go to work, you get your work done, you come home and you sleep.
Okay.
So you have rest throughout the day and your alarm clock wakes you up, right? So that's induced by you setting it up in advance.
But you could also, sure. But if you do that for a week and then you turn off your alarm clock, likelihood if you keep the same cycle, you'll just start getting up at that time anyways.
That's right. And so that's habituation. That is.
But would that relate to culture in terms of you've now developed this internal culture?
Totally. The whole point is, and that's so the way our brains are, the way our whole nervous system is set up is so that you can actually learn something. The process of learning, so before we go on to this, I've also gotten myself used to thinking about repetitive cycles of culture to be in much longer time frames than say even rain that falls. Like a rainfall that falls can happen within a day or in an hour, up and down, whereas a culture phenomenon of sorts can take much longer to establish itself or to loop itself in a way. One of the examples that I like to use is that if I was to compare myself, my functioning in the society to a functioning of, say, a molecule within a system, I actually like to think of my whereabouts in the scope of where I've been in the last year, and what kind of a cloud of movement that I create by moving around the world. So mostly I'll be within the home, within the studio, within the work, within this and that, and this is where the habits really play in, because by and large most people do the same things most of the time, very repetitively. Everything's very repetitive. The way you eat, the way you walk, the way you go, where you hang out, and this is going to bring us to the concept of social gatherings as well. Because ultimately the functioning of the system underneath, say, a biological system, is pushed by biological forces, right? Which is your actual needs. That's where the free will is. In my mind, life itself is free will, whereas culture is not free will. Culture is predicated on maintaining the social order, not biological order. That's why roles are much more important than individual itself.
But it's interesting because when you're talking about life, we were comparing that to breath, and I have to breathe. I can't choose not to breathe.
That's right.
So where does the free will play into that aspect?
That's a good point. Well, you can hold your breath. It's just very short-lived. Like if you don't breathe, you don't exist.
Yeah.
So no, but free will from the context. Well, you could say the same thing about almost any behavior you do. You don't have to go for a walk. You don't have to do anything really.
Right. I mean, it would be very hard to not breathe because eventually you would die, and so you'd be literally.
It would be hard not to eat. It would be hard not to want to go for that walk.
Yeah.
If you didn't want to, it's like it doesn't necessarily. I think the example that you're giving is an example that is exploring a bodily trait that is very closely related to direct survival. Right,
and maybe that relates more to the matter side of things than the life side of things.
No, not no. It would. I've just defined it as free will in the context is that you're breathing for yourself.
Okay.
Like the culture doesn't care whether if you stop breathing, they'll just swap you with somebody else who's breathing.
I see. Okay.
The context of free will is bound to your body rather than to the cultural group.
But you're still looking at free will from the perspective of the larger culture, as in, like, we all have free will, but that... yeah, because, I mean, breathing, like, you're right, I don't have to breathe for the survival of the group. I have to breathe for my own survival.
That's right. That's the angle. The angle is it's about you.
Yeah.
And I would say that, and so I'll tie this right into our well, the way I would treat music most of the time is that, say, if you think of a classical composition, the classical composition is extremely defined. You have to play it as is. Doesn't matter whether you're tired on the day, you have to deliver. This is why classical music is so challenging, right? But the way I've done, say, the music, the way I would approach music would be, I like to set a good framework, but then within the framework, I like to allow for freedom of expression, right? Which, and this I think will tie into some of the questions that we've been posing to each other, is that how to create a system where you have a structure, but also you're not stifling people.
Yeah.
And that's where the giving someone space to breathe, no pun intended, right?
Yeah.
Is giving them their free will. The space to breathe means they can also be themselves within the system as well. And I think that a lot of authoritarian systems don't like to give too much of that freedom. That's why the whole concept of freedom versus authoritarianism is such a threat. It's not, and the authoritarian regimes would look at it and call the freedom as anarchy, really. Right?
Right.
But really, it's not. It's just you wanting to do you. Right? Now, how is that
to express your did you put it, your genetics, your biology,
your genetical expression, whatever it is. But your genetical expression also is to serve the community, which is the culture, blah blah blah. So notice how this is where literally the cultural relativism that some people scorn comes into practice, because what's true for you might not be true what's true for the family structure or for the the community structure of what's asked of you to do for the society, right?
Yeah.
And we're born social creatures, so it's just as much our genetic expression is to go and do whatever we want to do. It's also just as much a huge need to serve and to meet one's own needs and other people's needs and be there and find greater value, which is what you and I both have discovered in the last year, which is what a lot of the events as a result of people trying to find communion of some sort as a result of so much isolation, that these events became larger than just doing a musical event, which in my mind these events are actually deeper than whatever Chai Gallery used to be. Because Chai Gallery sought to satisfy a few essential needs that you might have not found. Like in the West, the concept of larger gathering of families, if you will, is not really practiced a lot. Like you go down to the Balkans or the Greeks or whatever, there's just big party, right? And whereas here it's not. So if you create an event with that value being explored, there'll be people who are going to gravitate because that need's unmet. It's kind of like a breath. It doesn't kill you right away. And this is why the neglect of that is so dangerous, because it's so easy to dismiss, oh, you don't need to see anybody. I'm like, well, it's an essential human need, right? So that's one thing that drew.
And that falls under life, though, still.
That's right. But so here, okay, so the reason why I have these levels is that the forces of atoms. Here, I'll make a very clear distinction. There's a chemical reaction, and there's a biochemical reaction. Okay.
A chemical reaction and a biochemical reaction. So what and
they're both chemical reactions.
Yeah.
They're both equally chemical reactions. The only reason why there's a distinction in the name is because the biochemical reaction is involved in the functioning of the living system. But it's a chemical reaction.
So the biochemical reaction is within a living system, and the living system is defined by what? It's being a human or an animal?
No. It's by being the starting point is a cell. Okay. Sounds good.
So it could be related to plants as well.
It's related to every single living.
Okay, so there's biochemical reactions which are related to cells which create life.
That's right.
Okay.
And life's defined by a system where there's some kind of a replicative thing that maintains the cell structure. But ultimately, it's just a chemical system.
Okay.
What I'm drawing the attention to is that it's called a biochemical reaction. It's created as a distinctive thing from a chemical thing, only by the virtue that it created this kind of living-looking thing. But it's still a chemical everything in us right now is a chemical reaction.
Yeah.
Similarly, everything
but there's a differentiation between biochemical and chemical reaction within me too, or I'm all biochemical reaction. because I'm a living thing.
That's right. Although there are some things in you that are chemical reactions that have nothing to do. If you drink a bunch of Kool-Aid, there'll be a bunch of chemical reactions that your body is like, no, this doesn't belong in this biochemical system, right?
So to all the people who are drinking the Kool-Aid.
So the intention with the babushkas here, by the way, is that it's everything that is this thing is in here.
Yeah.
Everything that's below the system, you can call with the name of the system that's above. Right? So everything that is, let's find here, everything that is, a cell is equally has a composite particle in it. Mm-hmm. It's composed of composite particles.
Yeah.
So, right, so you can call, so that's why when you say, is it my need that I'm fulfilling? Or is it part of the cultural system? And my point is that it's a semantic. The moment your walk to the woods and back becomes something that you do with a bunch of people, and now you have to do it every week because that person expects you to walk with them.
Okay.
All of a sudden it becomes a cultural phenomenon. But the actual satisfaction of the needs, they're both in the domain of genetic expression.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers what you were saying earlier. Whether we call something a cultural trait, behavior, or a thought, or a value, only depends whether it's in the context of, if you go and live by yourself in the woods, you're not accounting for any cultural systems. You're doing your own thing. You can start because your brain is developed, and if you meet people there, you can. And this is where these socials came out.
Or you can start a culture with the living things around you. Like there could be animals around you that come. They know they get food every single day.
Exactly. And so it's a pared down. So you see how it's like you're creating culture out of out of life. That's why these red systems here are contained within the living system. You can't have culture without life. You can't have life without particles above it.
Yeah.
They all push each other. They're all underneath each other.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
So, okay, so in the context of, say, the culture that emerged in the Chai Gallery Social Club, there was the expectation that I would come and play violin there. So, like, for example, if I didn't come, then, for example, Barb might be like sad that I wasn't there because that's what was expected. Or pissed off.
Or she would have to, because she was managing everyone, she would have to find somebody else.
Right.
That's the role part.
Oh, okay, got it. So I was to play the violin. That was my role.
They need a musician.
And then if I was to break that culture by not showing up, then it would cause some kind of discord within the culture.
Right, that's right.
And so I have my free will because I can go like, oh, I'm going to decide not to do this today. Right? I have my free will, but it does affect the culture, and the culture doesn't have that kind of freedom embedded.
Culture is about harnessing free will.
Okay.
It's about noticing the individual and saying this thing that you're doing and wanting to explore around, I'm going to take that and I'm going to guide it in that direction.
Okay.
Right? That's why you go to school. Mm-hmm. Right? That's why you're told to sit. That's why you and I are not running around right now. It's like, stepping out. We're committed to this right now. So what we're doing is technically a cultural phenomenon. We're doing in the name of trying to have a conversation and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But again, that could happen naturally without having to have it imposed. This is why it can be so confusing to. This is why I wrote about this, because nobody defined any of these things. Okay? But now, so let me push it further.
Yeah.
Right here. This is the most important part, is that where's the switch between matter and life? And because notice, I don't know if this is something that you might have not caught, is that life starts within this bubble right here. And this bubble is really this bubble right here. Mm-hmm. So it's contained in here. So it will just become smaller and smaller. Like culture is down here. This is the babushkas, by the way. I have to expand it in order to show the details of it. Yep. So my challenge was to say, at which point do we define life as life out of matter, and at which point do we define culture as culture within life as well?
Right. So,
right? So that we can
okay, so what's contained within what? Matter is contained within life, and life is contained within culture. Is that the where you're going with it? That the biggest babushka is culture?
No, it's opposite actually.
Okay, the biggest babushka is
the matter. Everything is matter, including whatever makes culture.
Okay. So
and then within the world of matter,
you can
there's
open
certain
that
entities that were starting to create life.
Yeah.
And then some life started emerging cultures. And my stance is that cultures are predominantly emergent within any animals that, although you can expand it to trees if you want. This is why the trees, if you look over here, I'll just zoom in right now if since we're there. So within a system of cells, you would actually have here, this is the tree, these are trees organisms, right? Because there's differentiated cells, non-differentiated, there's all sorts of kinds of things, and animal cells arise here. And notice how I put dots around here, because I'm like, I don't know whether we can include these bubbles here in the creation of cultural systems or not, eventually or not. But for now, I'm pretty certain that they arise within animal cells. The reason why, animal living organisms is because they have...
What arises within animal living organisms? And you're including us in that too?
Yes, we have basically neurons. Okay. It's the neurons that carry memory. Okay, because you have to have some kind of a log of what happened in the past in order to be able to do it again, right? And so the log is retained within nervous systems, and every animal body has nervous systems, and that's why right here, starting from where are they? Sponges. That's why calm jellies and sponges I excluded technically, because sponges. Bilateral animals is where I think it happens.
What's bilateral?
Bilateral means that you have symmetry. We have two eyes, two ears.
Oh, interesting.
And for me, I think right and wrong. This is my one of the hypotheses. Is the fact that we, ever since animals could choose to go left or right, is where, well, freedom of choice has been invented. Because a jelly just floats around and eats whatever's in its way. It might be able to float around, and you see how muddy it becomes. But the moment you have that where you're moving left or right, then you can take a choice, and if you start choosing in a certain direction, then you're remembering that to do that, and that's where memory comes in, and that's where culture can emerge out of.
And you need the physiology to be able to make that choice.
Totally.
And then with the physiology comes the conscious development of making very different choices.
Totally. Now, to take a step back, to play my own devil's advocate, is that now you have trees and fungi and everything that's happening with that world. They're not animals, but what's happening within our nervous systems is that there's neurotransmitters that are doing a bunch of stuff and moving around and creating logs or memory banks or whatever you want to call them, right? And one can say that even though they are not neurons, that the networks of fungi and trees also have their networks of, this is why some of the researchers in that field are saying that these kind of like intelligences, if you want to call them, have been doing these kinds of things for millions and technically billions of years. If we want to look that deep, that these molecules have been communicating to each other, meaning they've been doing different combinations of interactions until they've landed into a place where they'll do something here in order for something to happen over there. Because trees, that's one of the arguments, a tree, if they notice that it's a sick tree, they'll protect it, or they'll do this or that. How do they know? And that's where the knowledge, this is one of the biggest problems with this writing, is that knowledge has been defined as something that's been scientifically proven true. Whereas for me, knowledge is you knowing that you're sad. Like, there's nothing scientific about you and I understanding the concept of sadness, but we both know what it means to be sad. So for me, writing this and thinking about these things is to open up the concept of knowledge to a whole new degree. right? Which is perfect for me because culture uses so many lingos but that are not even accepted in the scientific community. But they cannot not be accepted because they're part of culture. Right? So anyway, so from there on...
Well, one thing that occurs to me that's interesting, because you were talking about the sort of left and right and the symmetry, right? Bilateral beings. And I mean, when I think of a tree, for example, you have the bilateral aspect of the branches above the ground and the root system below the ground.
Perfect. So that would be another element. Yeah. So this is why there's dots here. That's muddy territory. So what I was doing is I'm like, all I wanted to define is where and how the culture emerges.
Okay.
And if we want to pursue the dotted areas further, well, we might as well, right? But if we but otherwise I was just packaging it in. I was just packaging to see what it says. So anyways, so just like so what happens now, I want to point this out as well before we go any further. So what happens is within living systems, within matter, there was a bunch of schnapps are the name of the atoms that would be communicating or interacting in such a way to give rise to living systems. Now notice that I need to point out the concept because this here is Chai Gallery, by the way. This here are socials. I'll get to it. But so this here are viruses. Okay, a virus is an entity in your body that quote unquote doesn't belong to your body. Okay? But it knows exactly what to do in your body. How does it know exactly what to do in your body if it doesn't belong in your body? Right? The answer to...
And is a virus like bilateral or not?
No. Hang on. A virus is a small molecule. It has nothing to do with life.
Okay.
That's why viruses... It's not living. Well... that's another thing that I've realized through the writing, that as much as it's not living, neither is melatonin. The molecule melatonin is not living, so should we call melatonin a non-living thing? Although virus is a collection of things. The point being is that not whether a virus is living or not, but whether a virus knows how to operate within a living or environment or not.
Okay.
And the reason why it knows is because viruses and everything that they're consisted of and the small molecules that they're related to have been doing life kind of things way before cellular life even ever came around, right? So what I've realized is that and then within that, membrane formed, and then a membrane protected only whatever was being replicated within that system. So what I realized is that, and now I'm going to jump to cultures just to try to tie it in because it's such a broad topic.
Yeah.
What I realized is that it's no different with cultural systems. There's certain ways of behaving, believing, and acting, and all these things that are only protected by by a specific cultural group, right? No matter how big it is or small it is, right? And any individual could potentially come into the system and be plugged into a role that they're assigned. Say if you missed your violin gig.
Yeah.
Hey,
right.
you over there, come over here, just hold this, do this.
Yeah,
fake
play
it
the
if you have to.
violin.
Play the violin.
We need you.
If you don't know, then you'll go through the process of learning how to do it, which in my mind is how cells create their proteins that they need proteins to do something. Except that in the world of proteins, it's a quick thing. Zoop, the protein is done. Whereas in the world of cultures, this is what I meant earlier, you have to think of it in longer scopes. In order to have somebody who can play the violin, you actually have to have a process to build up the person to be a ready contributor to the group, right? And we all have the capacity for it. Just like matter has the capacity to build biomolecules for living organisms, similarly, cultural systems can educate individuals to fulfill their roles within specific cultural systems. Okay, so now why I'm bringing this up is because a virus can be bad for you, good for you, or it doesn't care, right? Mm-hmm. So even though it's like a separate entity, the virus, it will function within your system. So that's why you, as a free living entity, can still function within a larger, say, city structure. And if you are, in my mind, in this analogy, if you're a person who's going around and messing with people's regular roles for the society, you would be seen sort of like a virus to the system. Right? If you're contributing to, because you know how they say you have good gut bacteria? And this is, I think that these live socials are good, healthy gut bacteria. Because a bacterium, a virus is a molecule, an actual bacterium is an actual cell. A bacterium is a cell, the smallest living format. And the biggest challenge I had in this writing is to define the unit of culture, the smallest unit of culture. And I thought it must be an individual, and it cannot be an individual, because an individual cannot replicate an idea, but two people can, which automatically raises or like emerges the concept of a social group. So for me, a small gathering of people who are fulfilling needs within the society, and in this case it could be either because another thing about child gallery socials is that they were fundraisers for children of war and all sorts of stuff. So even though that a lot of people couldn't directly relate to it just as much, in this case with pandemic, people who attend events, people who have been harmed by the pandemic responses, everyone in the group might be like, oh my god, like this is why it's so much of a higher meaning. But a lot of people donated then knowing that it's going for a good cause.
Yes.
So there's that, and there's the element of finding a community, and element of elevating yourself through music. All those three things, and the entity exists like almost like a bacterial structure, like a group structure within a larger society. And as long as you're not playing past 3 a.m., which we would have, as long as you're not bothering people too much, you can actually exist, just like a bacterium can exist in your gut, without the body getting rid of it, because it could actually improve the state. This is why even though a lot of bacteria in our gut have nothing to do with us. In fact, most of the biome of our bodies are not our genetic organisms at all, by the way. That's another thing that I found out. The more I looked into this, I realized your body builds you genetically, but a lot of life inside of you, a lot of unicellular life inside of you is just passing through. And it just so happens that it's benefiting you, right? And I think that I'm jumping ahead. Like, I think that one of the answers to your question that you asked me about, what's the meaning of these, how to live smaller within a large complex system, is exactly that. You have to create systems that get needs that are unmet otherwise within the larger multi-level system. Does that make sense? Like, you're satisfying the needs of individuals that are neglected by the main societal larger system, whether it's federal laws or provincial laws or city laws. You're creating smaller entities that are kind of filling up the picture.
And so that would benefit the larger culture, that bacteria.
That's right.
So you have this bacteria anomaly that could be compared to, say, the social club system.
That's right.
So you've got the bacteria that's living inside this larger culture that maybe have its unhealthy components, its positives and negatives, everything. But
it's doing its thing.
It's doing its thing, and it relies on people to play roles within that larger culture, right? But then this bacteria is kind of like happening. Just like in our body, there's bacteria passing through that's doing positive things, and we don't even know anything about it. We don't even know it's happening.
That's right.
And that would be the social club within our body, right? Is that like good bacteria that's passing through, but it is impacting the larger culture as well, without shaking up the roles, in a sense. Is that
would be my angle on how to maintain successful smaller gatherings, which essentially is private clubs, really. In some ways, they don't have to be private, but there are clubs. Like, you have rowing club, you have knitting club, you have movements against prejudice. So these are like the doing rowing clubs is something that the society. So there's divisions within this. There's certain clubs that are fighting. They're not fighting anything. They're just doing something that's societally accepted. It's just needed.
It's fine. They could talk about whatever they want to talk about.
However,
in the club and
not necessarily. Not if you're going against, like, during the times of slavery. I'm sure there would have been clubs that would have existed that were anti-slavery, right? And they would have been very segregational, and so they would have acted almost as not part of the mainstream culture. And as it came out, then people would know about them, and then you could go, and that's how they could change this, the bigger they got. This is why I was earlier saying depends how many people oppose or not.
Yeah.
Remember? So
not the
once
guy
they become
on the corner that's just yelling out to himself.
That's right, exactly. That guy on his corner is not a group. He's not. He's technically this is where I think Richard Dawkins confused me because he defined the concept of a meme. By the way, because I tied in the concept of a meme into this whole thing in the same way he defined it as a gene, because a gene is a piece of information that will tell an organism what to do. A meme is a thing that will tell a person what to do in a society. The reason why he coined this whole phrase is because there was people who would in the name of religions go and kill.
Okay.
That was the reason why he did it. And so he would say a deadly meme, just like a deadly virus, would be a person who goes and kills a bunch of people in the name of an idea, whereas a virus will kill it just by... But I think that as much as I agree with all that, the only thing that I quite didn't not agree with, but it doesn't check out in the actual definition, is that the meme needs to act in the name of the societal group. So if a meme needs to kill something, it's not a few people over here. It's meant to kill the roles. It's meant to kill the entire structure of the society, so that the society can't function anymore. The society would break down, right?
So a meme is trying to direct culture. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the way I've defined, in my mind, an easy way of understanding what a meme is, and a lot of people, as a result of this and not being defined very well, a lot of people thought is that meme is the way you carry your hat, or how you dress, or it's like just some cultural elements. No, for me, memes is anything that you should do. If you have to do something, it's a meme. And should do means you have to fulfill a role. Right? So if you don't have to fulfill a role, then it's free will. Then you can do whatever you want. You can go for a walk.
So give me an example of a meme.
You have to go to work.
That's a meme?
You should go to work.
That's a meme.
Yeah. You should take care of your elderly. You should take care of your children. You should wear clothes outside. You should...
so cultural expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. In order to maintain the social order. Because otherwise it's anarchy, right? Memes genes keep the homeostasis of a body together, whereas memes keep the social order of a society together.
And how does that relate to meme culture online? Is this a different thing?
No, not necessarily. Although the rise of AI is kind of like an entity of its own. That I would out of this now say AI. I think I have it in here somewhere. That AI actually comes out of cultures as well, or the world of social media.
Are you saying
as long as it's humans interacting with humans?
Culture developed by computers?
If you want to call it culture, you might want to have to use a different name. It's more. I'll answer it even more. What Elon is doing with Twitter, is he's trying to say is that and this is the free speech is free. This is why it's such a close related topic, because he's saying that Twitter should quote unquote have free speech, but the people who are wanting to censor on Twitter are saying no, you can't just say whatever. Okay. You see, there's always a battle. And in my mind, what I've learned is that it's not like you can get complete free will, free speech, nor you can or should ever do complete domination either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There needs to be some balance in between. So what he's trying to say is that we shouldn't regulate people too much, because Twitter is now, supposedly, I'm not much on Twitter, but social media actually censors a lot. Censoring is when you're not doing what you should be doing, which is a meme.
Okay.
Right, or what and then this is memes are what your main narrative is telling you. So when your politician comes at you and says that you should take a specific, medical product, that's a that's a meme. There's another example of a meme. Anything with everything, pretty much, we swim. Just like when you go into a biological system, and you'll see that the expression of most of those biochemical reactions are expression of genetic of genetics. Similarly, when you walk around a society, most of the things you'll see are expressions of mimetics. People drive cars in lanes. They stop at red signs. People pick up the poo after their dogs. If they didn't, that's scorned upon. And notice how there's now all of a sudden a batch of rules. And rules and laws. And so, if I can further push the meme, there's degrees of how strongly it comes. There is the rule of law, which is like the things that everybody accepts within a large society. Then there's the rules, which are within specific establishments. These are all memes. Then there's the rules, which falls into the category of smaller clubs. Like if you come to my club,
you have to do this.
Right?
You have to do
Then there is the ones that are the unspoken rules. If you watch, what is it, the one with you can't handle the truth movie. What is it called? 4th of July or whatever it is.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
With that's an excellent movie because in there they tackled the thing that the what are they called? Even the military complexes, this happens in any social group, they have their unwritten rules about what you should do. Say in the cantina you should do this. Well, where's that written in the rule book? Nowhere. But everybody knows it. So there's also the rules of thumb, memes as well. Things that you should just do, you know? And that's where people would, you know, bully if you don't do it, even though nobody's expecting you. So there's, and then some of those get accepted into official rules, some of them that through politics get accepted into official laws. And there's like a whole range of them that hey, you have to abide by if you want to live within a specific societal system, right? Yeah.
Interesting.
I know, there's a lot. Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
What's right, what's wrong?
What's right and what's wrong?
Yeah, what's right, what's wrong?
Well, I mean, at its most simplest form, does it cause harm? Or, you know, injury, basically.
To whom?
Well, to a living entity.
So if you're in a boat that holds only 10 people, there's only 10 people, and there's people swimming toward you. This is a famous Tragically Hip song, you know.
What?
When they what was the song? It was one of the first albums I got exposed by them.
Yeah.
There's a song, I can't remember the name, but it's basically a dream. It's about a dream where he dreams about how if they allow more people in the boat will sink and everyone will die. So you're kind of prompted to have to kill people.
Well, it's like the train thing too, right?
That's the trolley problem.
Yeah, the trolley problem.
This is directly the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why what's right and wrong, what's true and false in a scientific context is whether you have enough marbles on the table. Can you count the marbles? This is why I find that mixing too many scientific lingo into trying to make ethical decisions is such a bad idea. Because you cannot forget about the underlying ethical values in the picture. So, the question is more what's right. It's not. What I've realized is that it's not about whether it's right or wrong, but for whom it is right and whom it is wrong.
Okay.
Right? Because the value systems or the means or the rules and laws of a society are right for the people who have decided to give their allegiance to that society to some degree, right?
Okay.
Right. So that's what's right for that society, right? So that's why the definition of what's right and wrong is not mathematical, but it's really defined on. It's biological, really, because cultural is born out of biology. Right? And out of our needs. Mm-hmm. So if you have a community or people who were born very aggressive, like that's just this is where it becomes hard to talk about it because we breed dogs to make them a specific way.
Yeah.
But if you suggest that humans can be throughout ages be shaped up into either through maintaining, marrying off the aggressive, or the smart ones with this ones or that ones, with you marry them off so that they can carry on those genes, or you train them to be a specific way. You're actually creating a specific order within a society that is based on the needs of these people. So if you have a society that has very aggressive people, then you'll have a very warlike society. So going to war can be the right thing to do for people who need war, if that makes sense. And so the concept of a need is a very tricky one, because on one hand, it's something that you're just born with, because without being alive, needs make no sense. The actual expression of the need is the concept of life. And then when you say, well, I have to do this, and you say, well, you don't have to do it. Well, do you or do you not, if it's your need, for in the context of the social structure. So the way I understand what's right and wrong is whether if the system was developed in such a way to create a specific role that would attend to a specific need of the people, because there's a bunch of needs that we have, right? And if a specific rule is developed in such a way that aids or attends to that need, then that's right. That's how I would define it.
So something that I would throw in there is that when we have these sort of negative emotions, right? These emotions that put us in lower vibrational states, let's call it.
Okay.
That it's usually an unmet need that needs to be filled in order to become so when you're talking about, like, say, aggressive, angry culture, let's say, right?
Yeah.
That would reflect some kind of an unmet need.
No, it could go both ways, actually. If you're that's a good twist, actually. That's very good, because it depends whether the anger is being done in the name of something that you should just do in the name of society, or if it's a response to something that you don't like that's being done.
So what I'm thinking of specifically is statements that have been made about, like, from the oligarchs of what's going on here today, about, for example, us living in an angry world, right?
Right.
And this is all in coordination with needs that are being unmet, basically. That people will be essentially angry with the world that they're in, because my perspective would be that they're not having needs met, and so they're angry.
That's right. Yes. Now, absolutely, yeah, that would be the definition of it. So the anger, right. My angle was a bit different. There's this different element to anger.
So tell me about what your angle was. Because I'm giving you, like, sort of.
No. You're actually 100% correct that a general my angle to that would be that whenever your needs not met, you approach it with anger and attack, rather than, say, with conversation and understanding first, right?
So then that would be a product of culture.
Of culture, right? That's right. So it's like, and if you have if you're teaching everyone within your group to always fight with somebody when it's not their way, then you're breeding an angry-like culture. And you would say that's the right way to do it, because we have to fight against oppression, or whatever you want to call it, whether it's right or not. So then it can create anger. It can make anger a right thing to do, which is justifiable. So you have to fight for your rights, right?
Well,
so,
and you also have to feel how you're feeling, right? So if you're angry, if you suppress that, it's going to cause more damage.
Right. Now, but is it justified every time to do it? If you're only running this to be angry and fight, because, like, throughout the years, another thing that I've learned is that there's levels of steps that you can go through. I mean, every HR book would ironically have this, is that you should go and have a nice conversation with the person and discuss it before you would ever resort to wanting to attack them right away for what they've done, right? So it's about conduct. It's about how you behave within society is ultimately what shapes whether the society is right or wrong. What my point is that the reason why I brought up the anger one is that you could actually create a society that is very reactive and angry and confrontational without doing any of the understanding steps before, and still call it that it's the right thing to do.
Just because I feel like that's sort of what's happening.
I know. That's why we're starting our smaller groups that are all based on love.
Yes.
Because it's missing, right? And that's how you can promote this kind of way of being amongst people within a larger societal system that is actually lacking attendance to that.
So what you're saying is, like, if the larger cultural body is saying, you know, reactivity and anger is the way to go.
Yes.
And you're in that and not feeling like that is the way to go.
That's right.
You can create small bacteria-like groups in that larger pods in that larger culture, and eventually that's going to shape the culture because you have it's going to
or witches are going to be burnt on the stake. That's the thing. This is my point. Depends how much it gets heard.
Yeah.
Because you can have, sorry to interrupt, but that's ultimately the point.
Yeah.
It depends whether you can, and I agree with you. You have to create the smaller system with the hopes of raising the odds of that happening. But I'm just saying there's no guarantees. But
even what you're saying is that good bacteria, should you not notice it in the culture, it's still benefiting the whole culture.
Yeah, but you'll still take the what is it called? The
antibacterial
drugs to flush the whole system and not think about it. This is my point. Is like it depends whether you're attending to it or not.
Right. So
in society, we're really neglecting a lot of the kind of like being there with the heart element for people. You know?
I guess the comparison I'm making is where you see the bacteria in the body that you don't notice, right? But it's benefiting the body.
Totally.
Right?
Yes, that would be an example.
And it's benefiting the body because it's inside the body and it's connected, right? Just like the air between us is connecting us together, right?
That's right.
And just the same as the social gathering that is based around love is connected by, let's say, the air and the space in between
the interactions as well.
The interactions. But then I'm also looking at the larger context of that. The bacteria, that positive bacteria, that's the social group, okay? That's still connected to the larger culture, and the larger culture has no idea. But yet, the air between the people in that room and, like, you know, authoritarian psychopaths it's still connected.
Yes.
There is something that that can still be positive even if the larger culture isn't aware of it.
Absolutely. Because those people who attend these events still exist within the confines of the larger society. They still go back into the society feeling different, thinking differently, and then radiating in a different way within that society. They'll show up at the work next day feeling good, and they're like,
people what are you taking?
Well, it's kind of like getting laid really well, right?
Right.
And that's another thing, is like, how much do you repress society sexually as well? And here's where the rubber really hits the road.
Okay.
And that is that yet again, I go back to the fact that what is it, the KGB guy Yuri Bezmenov, who said that the act of promoting hateful and divisive dialogues is a way to kind of dismantle a society.
Yeah.
And he actually said that as long as the society is very traditionally structured, man and a woman, with children only, you know, you don't have to deal with bastard kids down the line, you know, within the context of that. Everybody knows who's, so it never works out because people are just have too much free will. That's the point. But what he did say is that if you have a very repressive society, very rigorous society, to live exactly by this very simple.
There's one way, but
it's very simple as well. That's another thing he said, and it's cookie cutter. So it's like you can't be over there expressing some other sexuality or this kind of a thing. Everyone's in a missionary position. Shut up and live it. He's saying that those kind of systems
lights off, no music.
And then that guy has to bring it in, and then everybody next day at the cooler talks about it. Can you believe what he did?
Yeah, right.
But what he says is that these...
So kinky, they did it with the lights on.
The system supposedly, the claim is actually function better long term.
Yeah.
With people miserable. But notice, people are not happier, but the system is more stable. This is why something can be right for the societal system, but not right for the people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So you can create a ridiculous amount of stuff people have to do and maintain the societal system very well, but everyone underneath is just hating it, right? Or you can, and you have to a lot of times do things that you don't feel like in order to order, because we all have to live in a large system. It's very hard to live with millions of people around you and function really well. Because you have to have people show up for it, you know? So it's directly, this is where free will is directly fighting with cultural norms and roles and rules and laws and everything, or can, even though it all emerged out of free will to begin with. That's my point. That's why it's counterintuitive. Because free will is our needs. It's harnessed. So they're harnessed. It's chemical versus biochemical, and free will versus harnessed free will, if that makes sense.
So chemical is just the reaction?
They're both reactions.
Right, but it's just the reaction that's not based on life.
That's right. Whereas biochemical is just a reaction, but it's just within life. Whereas free will, where you free will being, I need to do something with myself in life. I want to go for a walk, and then you find a job that takes people out for tours, and all of a sudden your free will is satisfied, but it's also in the context of having a role now that satisfies your need. But now it's a role, and then if 10 years down the line you realize I don't really feel like being outside, now you're stuck with the role. And you don't feel like it anymore. You used to, but you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, got it. So a lot of cultural systems get formed in the past. This is why a lot of people don't know how to read religious texts or misinterpret them completely, because the context that people functioned under just notice how different. If you told somebody 3 years ago that it would be normal for everyone to wear masks outside, they would tell you you're crazy.
Yeah.
But notice how quickly it changes. Now, take it 100 years back when there's no electricity. Who knows how the social dynamics played out in order to create any kind of norm, based on needs that were trying to play themselves out in those environments. You know what I mean? So that's been my biggest preoccupation, is to... the funny thing is, it doesn't... if anything... exposes more the fact that we technically, when the moment you start looking at a cultural system, you almost cannot but not have to neglect the individual, because you can't think of the individual if you're thinking of the bigger system. And that's why the large socialist movements are all about just the movement and the person. You just have to do it for the greater good, or whatever it is, right?
So if the culture is this moving car, right, that's coming full speed, and you're like, I don't want to be on this road because I don't fit in the car, and I don't want to get hit by the car, so I need to, live parallel to this cultural thing that's happening. I mean, where does that go? Because it's so imposing, right? Like what's happening right now in our culture is so imposing. I've never felt in my life like I was required to fill. It's such a paradox, though, because I was required to fill a role, but now it's. As an adult, when you're like not in the family system and you're not in the institutional like education world, etc., the desire, at least for me, is I want to be my own self. I want to make my life, and I want to create culture that is sort of coming from me. That's something that I feel like we've had, the experience of playing in a band with you. You created a culture that was emanating from your source, right?
My thought on that would be is that just as much there is a person who that you're technically talking, I think, about leadership here.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that just as much as we're born to want to be leaders, we're equally born to want to follow.
Yeah.
We have that genetic need within us as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think by and large, many people out there really like the idea of just joining a group that's already formed to fit the role into, rather than to spearhead a movement to build it. It's very hard to build, and not hard. It's a very involving process.
So, but everybody could be the essential source of their own culture, right?
They could. It would. Yes, absolutely. That's your home.
Everybody could be the central source of their own culture.
And to a large degree, they are. We all have our little habits that only we have.
Yeah.
That we, if given the chance, this is my habit. Like, this is not in any universities or anywhere.
Yeah.
I wrote this on my own free will.
Well, you're an example of somebody who emanates their own culture,
right?
Because you take a leadership role in that way, like even at the event, like the way that you have everything detailed and mapped out, and people have to follow you because you have this culture that you've developed around that's your ecosystem, right? And the same thing with the band. I see that too, and probably the same thing with this work too. That you've created a culture around your ecosystem of what's.
A lot of the ways that I build these cultural systems personally are also something that I've learned by living in very strict disciplined systems.
Okay, tell me about that. That's interesting.
Turkey and Serbia, man. If you don't follow, you get beat up, man.
Okay.
And a lot of it is so structured that.
So how do you come from a place where you get beat up if you don't follow the system to being somebody who is leading the way in creating systems?
What I would say is that I equally reacted to. It's ironic because. On one hand, the strict authoritarian systems that I was raised in disciplined the crap out of me. They really did. There's something to be said about repetition is everything. And if you have to get up every morning, regardless, that is what culture is. You do it regardless how you feel. Right? That's what military is, right? That's why people love being in those environments, because they bond around these hardships and all that kind of stuff. Now, I've learned throughout life that a lot of the mainstream and just general larger system narratives are actually not very healthy for people, a lot of them, but they do carry the discipline that you can learn out of it. So what I've done is that I've taken the discipline element and I've attempted to now create smaller systems that attend to a larger spectrum of needs, but I'm still using the same amount of discipline within the whole thing. That's why I pre-plan everything, because then you have a smooth, good show or event or whatever.
So it sounds to me like you learned a lot about leadership from inner discipline that you got in these circumstances that were imposing.
In a way, that's right. You would.
So in a way, people can learn through this process that we're going through about their own inner leadership.
Yes, totally. You can do that. Oh, and then you can. So now what happens when you, because for me, the biggest learnings for life are shaped when we're younger or from childhood and on. Once you're an adult, you're kind of formed. And props if you're able to, this is why it's such a big deal, if you're able to learn and develop and keep pushing yourself into adulthood as well, because it gets all that harder because the established neural networks are competing for the new ones. Like you have already so much, your head is just filled with things that you do regularly, you have to worry about all regularly. If you're able to somehow on top of that still develop and learn, then great. Keep it up, but it's much harder, I find. So that's why for me these disciplines can be imposed onto children. So the question is that how militant do you get within your own, if you're raising your own child, for example, right? Because and how do you do it? And that's been another fascinating approach for me of how to develop that. But yeah, exactly. You can learn a lot from the large systems. That's why they're functional. That's why we can live in a nation state that has millions of people in it, and the way I see it, by the way, can I unpack this one. So to bring another analogy in, and that's this world right here. This is the world of whether let me see how to open out this one. It's actually this world right here, and that is that it's funny the amount of once I started building this world, it's amazing how things just without me wanting to match them started matching, just because it checks out. For example, a bacteria that doesn't have a nucleus. So that's called what is it called? Eukaryotic versus what is it called? Prokaryotic cells. It's like cells before the nucleus and after the nucleus. And what nucleus has, it has all the genetic material inside, and the nucleus controls literally how to express genetic material into the cell. Whereas when there is no nucleus, the genes are just floating around and they're just getting expressed by the design of the bacterium itself, or the cellular system itself. What's really interesting is that not a single multicellular organism, so an organism that has a lot of cells, not a single multicellular organism is without a nucleus, really. And if it is, it's called colonies. So you'll have bacteria that I had to do so many researches around this to find out how these systems work in order to get a picture of it.
Yeah.
So this is the findings. So the nucleus somehow enables the cells to create a multicellular organism. Okay? Mm-hmm. How? So now notice this. Now, in the analogy, my analogy, humans are born with two genetic predispositions, societally speaking. This is society, because you can have needs and genetic expressions that have nothing to do with sociality. You know, the only sociality for many animals like turtles in the sea is procreation. That's the only time they socialize. Otherwise, they're born on the beach by themselves, they float off by themselves, they don't socialize. And when they run into someone, they might mate, and that's the social element. And what's happened within mammals, so mammals are the animals that emerge out of the large spectrum of animal cultures that were born with a genetic predisposition to socialize, to want to be around each other, right? So that's the bubble in here that I did. So one of the bubbles in here is, okay, well, this animal has that element, that extra gene that will code for it to be social, right? So now, once you're social, how do you socialize? How do genetics play into the sociality of it? So the two main groups, or two main traits that humans and many animals have, is the egalitarian mode, which is I'm equal with you. And then there's the hierarchical mode, which is I'm your boss, right? And I think the reason why mammals, to a large degree, would have, I think, evolved it is because our offspring is born so defenseless and in need of direction that would have co-evolved with us, with our genetical predisposition to have to direct. The mistake that a lot of people do, I think, with this need is that they treat grown adults as children as they grow up as well. I think it's important to wean off and this is one of the mistakes. But don't get me wrong, you need to have a cook in the kitchen. So we're very, very predisposed to take orders from adults as well. Even though I'm saying we should wean off, yeah, like when you're in an army situation or in a restaurant or whatever, you have to be the person who can walk in. Same with our events.
Yeah.
You have to know how to follow.
There has to be leadership.
There needs to be leadership, and at the same time, the person needs to know how to follow the leadership. Yeah. But that's in the context of hierarchy. And what hierarchy does is that it allows the person who's under to not worry about it. It's the burden is on the manager, really, which is why it's such a harder role in a way. Whereas when you're in an egalitarian system, we both have to negotiate for our own. And that's one of the most interesting parts that I realized, especially with trying to now start working to trying to create communities within the context of scratch. Like these events, post-pandemic events that we've done, are events that have been, these communities are literally, for me, this has been an experiment, actually.
Yeah.
Literally out of my writing.
Yeah.
How do you create, so you find a specific set of values that are needed, and then you build it off of that. But what I realized is that even though I was kind of like the cook in the kitchen or kind of the dominant person. By and large, I do like to function in systems where it's mostly egalitarian. It means you have to fend for yourself. And the more, so then I started learning about lifestyles of egalitarian system, and you realize that it's very rough because nobody's deciding for you. You have to go out there and negotiate for yourself, which means that you have to be much stronger in order to be able to say no. Because in an egalitarian system, you're prompted to have to negotiate your way. Whereas in a hierarchical system, you're told what to do. You don't have to negotiate nothing. You just do what you're told.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So now, what I found is that every multi-level, so there's multicellular organism, and there's a multi-level society, which is, we have our family structures, and then you have the family, like the parents who are in charge, for example, or whoever is in charge. Then you have the village square, where people meet and make decisions for the village. Or if it's city, there's a city, they make decisions. Then you have the provincial, larger group. And notice every time this happens, it's one representative out of the smaller group is joined with the representatives from other smaller groups to create a small group. Usually, yet again, only about 100 people. Every organization, even if it's a governmental organization, if you look at the federal government cabinet, there's like 200-300 people making decisions for all of us, right? Because it's exponential, right? Like you have 100 groups. Out of each 100 groups, you send one person, and now you have one group of 100 people who can now have. And what I've noticed, this is where I'm going with this. Each one of these groups are not egalitarian. They're all hierarchical, just like, and which means they have the nucleus. The hierarchy, the person at the top is the nucleus. They carry the memes and they're telling you what to do. They're regulating what you're doing. Just like a nucleus is regulating the functioning of a cell.
Okay.
And what I've come to...
So in your systems, you're the nucleus.
Technically, I would be acting as the nucleus in that metaphor.
Right.
And my role. Not me, my role.
Right.
Because I'm exchangeable. And that ties into your question of if I'm gone, if this... event is truly set up to get needs met and create a society that can be carried on, I don't need to be around anymore. You can set it in such a way that, but then depends who will, that's why you have to find someone who can fill the role to that level, blah, 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 right?
One question I have that's, I guess I gravitate towards a more egalitarian type of desire when it comes to, you've seen that with just even the way I express myself when I'm in the band with you and I want to get involved and get my hands dirty and things and stuff like that. But at the same time, coming from a hierarchical structure, that's always some sort of a challenge in situations when, even in my own situation, if I'm in charge of something and somebody comes and they're like trying to co-pilot with me, that's, it puts a strain on the assumed culture of hierarchy.
That depends on whether the cook in the kitchen is open to constructive criticism.
Okay.
Right? Because for me, a healthy society and notice, society can be a small potter group or it can be a huge nation state.
Yeah.
It can be a cell or it can be a huge multicellular organism.
Yes.
Right? That's a system.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it has to be a healthy dose of both. In my mind, you need to have a cook in the kitchen, but if you're interested in the well-being of others, this is why democratic governments usually have large coalitions. They have large groups of cabinet members, because the bigger the group, the more of them need to address the needs of the smaller it is. This is the dictator's hand guide book.
Yeah.
It talks about directly about the
smaller it is, the easier it is to control.
That's right, and more money to pay the generals off to and do whatever you want. You become more selfish if you're smaller.
They don't come to the table to make decisions. You just pay them.
That's
to
right,
do what
but
you want.
that's the first past the post argument, which is like you get so much more done if there's one cook in the kitchen. You see, there's always. It's a double-edged sword on both ends. You don't want to give too much agency to the people, and you don't want to give too much agency to the, to the whoever's at the top of the hierarchy. That's why, for me, when you say that you like to come with feedback, I listen to the feedback. You still need a cook in the kitchen, but the feedback's super important. And at the moment the person starts listening to the feedback, they're doing it for themselves, not for the group. Right? But now, I can't listen to every single feedback because I also have a vision. So how do you create a balance between the two? And I think this is why, ultimately, anybody who wants to lead and create any kind of a society that's in the name of the people needs to know how to listen to people. How do you listen to people's voices ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Now, even bigger trouble comes into, and this is what's happening with the pandemic, when you label yourself as an expert, which means, Michael, there's no way you can know. You just don't know. So you even asking questions is futile, because you'll never know.
Yeah.
So you're just the only thing you're left is, and this is where informed consent choice totally is dropped out of the window, because I'm just saying, I am the only one who can make a decision for you. You just need to shut up and do what I say. Which kills.
I'm the expert.
Which makes it authoritarian. Which is the emerges authoritarian societal systems, really, I think.
So okay, and that brings me to a question that I have about the research that you've done and how you've basically gone and done independent research that I mean, I don't know your qualifications, like, from what have you studied?
I went so I finished physics and computers honors at UBC.
Okay.
So physics degree, full-blown physics honors degree.
Yeah.
So I learned everything you need to know about physics, which helped me with this system, the blue system.
Yeah.
Then I did computer science, which made me think about algorithmical thinking, which is everything has to fit into place. In a computer program, if there's a bug in there, it'll mess with you. So you can't have mistakes. So I just build it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And what I did was, in the process of writing this entire manuscript, I joined forums online. This is another perk of having internet. I joined physics forums.
Yeah.
And I asked about hundreds of questions. They kind of loved me there.
Really?
Yeah, because
I bet.
Well, because like most people come and ask, what's a covalent reaction? You know, and now you have to explain basic. You know, so they would say, a lot of people say, so hang on, like, what course is this for? You know. I'm like, no, man. I'm just here, man.
I'm writing a book.
And then there's like 3 or 4 core referenced. If you actually go to the acknowledgements, 3 of them, I asked them. One of them just he gave me his full name and credentials.
Yeah.
One person gave me his name, and the other person just kept it under his whatever pseudonym he was or handle he was using.
Yeah,
he didn't want his exposure. Those guys they were all high-end, like, biologists, because I went into the forum area that dealt with biology. And I'm like, okay, I want to know eukaryotic cells, blah, 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 tell me. And they wouldn't know, so they would go back and then come back. So I spent years asking questions, really.
So okay, this is interesting. So last night I was showing somebody old video of me when I went to Europe with my family, and for me, the experience of just showing, like, you know, relatives of Django Reinhardt that I could play would get me on stage with them, right? We didn't go there with a plan. We just went, and so I had this childhood experience of being shown that if you can show that you are legitimate, that people will accept you and they'll invite you to participate, right?
Yes.
What I'm interested in knowing is, what experience did you have in your life that gave you the confidence to go and do the independent research? Because people could point their finger and say, you're not an expert, so you shouldn't be digging into this. But yet you had the confidence to go into these forums, discuss with experts, even though it's going beyond the academical studies that you've done. You're delving into territory where you required to interact with people with a certain confidence. What gave you that confidence?
I think it's a good question. This is a very personal question for me.
Totally.
I think I could find a few answers for that.
Yeah.
One of them is, I think, the fact that this is where I have to give some agency to my parents, especially my mother.
Yeah.
Who would be there for me and make sure that I'm well taken care of, no matter what.
So what's an example of that?
It's a safety net. Well, to make sure that I'm not hungry if I decide to jump off the ladder, you know, and then go off do whatever I want to do, that I'm just going to end up on the side curb, right? Like the family.
So you knew you were going to be taken care of.
The support system of my family and my brothers as well, as a result. Like, the entire family structure that it was designed was one where it allowed for me to have a sense of personal security in the world to play around. Mm-hmm. It was don't get me wrong, like, the family structure in the way it was designed from my parents was very demanding of me to continue pursuing computer science especially. Every former Yugoslavian went into computer science to get out of the war, really. There's no questions. That's what I did. Once I jumped off that ladder, it was not received very, very nicely by the family structure, let's call it, because I did something else.
Right, but you had the confidence from earlier experiences.
Because I was very supported underneath.
Yeah.
That was one reason. Second one is I had a twin brother with whom I think we were, like, to a large degree, like peas in the pod when it comes to ideas as we grew up. We allowed ourselves to always challenge each other. We never allowed each other to get away with something that we didn't explain properly.
Okay.
Like, it was like, no. Like, you know, and we studied together throughout university. He studied the same thing. So every time we would be on something, we'd always, no. What does that mean? Like, that whole thing. Now, how did I get myself to a point to have the courage to step outside? I don't know. I'm just doing it and taking a risk.
I mean,
maybe I'm just risk prone. Maybe I'm one of those, that could be my temperament. I'm one of those risk taking, creative, whatever you want to call it.
What was the earliest risk that you took in your life?
To leave the academia and world and jump into the world of music. That's like one thing that, the earliest thing is to read the book of Alexander Neill's Sumerhill book.
What's that?
So there was this guy in the 20s in the UK who created a school where he allowed children to do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And he was very successful. It's called Sumerhill. Mm-hmm. And it was a book in my parents', I don't know what it was doing there, but it was in the library there. And I got hooked on it when I was like 12, 13. And I think that book shaped the rest of my life. Because
how?
By allowing myself not to follow the norms.
So what did the book talk about?
Yeah, it's all about doing whatever. Like, he's like, the motto of, it's called How to, it might be in here actually. It's probably somewhere around here. The premise of the book is that rather than to tell children what to do, you listen to children what they want to do. It might not be in there. I might have displaced it.
Sorry.
Instead of telling children what to do, you wait for the child to see what they're interested in, and then you feed that.
Okay.
And then he was developing educational systems out of the child rather than out of what the system was doing.
And so when did you read that?
When I was like early teenage years.
How did that come into your...
It was just in my parents' library. I just
decided to read it.
I caught my attention. And then I remember mentioning to my mom at some point, she's like, oh, is that book about that school that lets children do whatever they want? And I'm like, yeah, it's cool.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What do you think interested you about that in particular?
I think for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's my Asperger's. I don't know.
Well, because the thing is that anybody can open up a book and read a few lines and say, you know what, this isn't for me, but you clearly resonate.
I clicked with it, but it's not just the clicking with the concept. It's about wanting not to stick it to the man, but to go against the grain. And this is what I'm saying is that the way people are kept in line is that you, again, are genetically predisposed to feel ashamed if you expose yourself and you get bullied and scorned. And I think especially as twins, we got bullied in Turkey. This is another element of living in very harsh environments. I was bullied and like the amount of bullying, the fact that I get called a person who, you know, as a white tall guy, as this or that, I was unbelievably bullied when I was a kid, and I think that might have helped me grow a thicker skin. Mm-hmm. But I can't really understand. I couldn't answer to you why is it that I'm pushing this to this level. I'm just interested.
Well, but that is obviously was a key learning experience. So you're an academic thinker.
Right.
And from a young age, you stumbled upon an academic book about thinking in an intuitive way.
Yeah, except the Sumerhill book wasn't an academic book. It was it was about child rearing. It was a school teacher who's created a school, which was a part of its own.
Yeah.
Right?
So well, maybe not academic from the sense of like university or whatever, but I guess I'm thinking like it was teaching a philosophy that is related to a way of living that would lead you down a path to do things like this, right?
It was a way of thinking that allowed for exploration outside of the norm.
Okay.
And what I've realized once I read that and once I really took that on, honestly, and music just The moment you go into the world of music, you're already in that world of pushing for yourself. But the biggest thing I started noticing is that there's a lot of hypocrisy in the world.
So did you start seeing that as a teenager when you read that
Yeah.
book? So that opened your mind to
Yeah.
the hypocrisy of the culture that you were in.
And then for some reason, I guess I have enough temperament to push against it. Now, whether I can, ironically, it goes first circle because my family gave me the confidence, and it backfired because I used my confidence.
This is part of the
It's all the same, right? This is why when we talk about whether something is a culture or free will, it's all born out of the same thing.
Yeah,
it's something becomes a cultural norm, and some of it still continues. I mean, you still brush your teeth in the way you want to brush your teeth.
Yeah,
you know, everyone uses their washroom in the way they want to use it because there's a lot of private areas that are not as culturally mandated upon, you know? So everyone has their, but how much do you push into the mainstream world with your own ideas is just, I guess, an expression of your own personal temperament to a large degree. But I think it's nurture and nature. I think it is both of those. I just have the personality, and I also had certain, I don't know, upbringing traits that led me to this path.
It's interesting, though, the cycle that you're also, because this is all based on cycles, right?
It's all cycles.
And you're talking about the cycle of how your parents raised you, which to me, it sounded like they were supportive, and they were probably encouraging of intelligent thought.
While you're a kid. Once you start becoming, you know.
So here's a funny one, and this is just, so this is like, you know, different people have different experiences. Something that I've reflected on recently is that my mother would talk about me when I was younger with the way, with the way that I would improvise, okay? And
really?
She would talk about it as channeling.
Okay.
But it's interesting.
Channeling,
yeah.
Okay.
As if, because like what I could do is I could listen to recording of somebody playing or go to a concert, and then I could absorb all the like ideas and the expressions and then channel that into my playing, right?
Great. Yeah.
And so they're using this very spiritual term, and my parents are.
That's a very spiritual term.
My parents are agnostic or atheist, more so, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to use the language channeling is such an interesting thing to be putting into a child's mind of like where their innate talent or predisposition for ideas comes from, right?
Right.
And now I'm like, you know, yesterday I did breath work with a rabbi, you know, and we're like doing really like energetic things that are essentially can be attributed to beyond the physical container, right?
Yes.
And so there's this cycle, and it's like, so what they, you know, what they groomed me for became the thing that is like it's like, but it's not pleasing to them, and it almost makes me think of like Frankenstein, where it's like you create this thing that you're like terrified of.
That's
right?
exactly it. Yeah, and I mean, yet again, we're in that same position where we can call it channeling, or we can call it, you know, way of absorbing, you know, external influences into your own internal influences, and then re-expressing them in your own way. I mean, you can use technical jargon to your heart's desires. You know, it doesn't have to be spiritual. It could be. That's why for me, I've been allowing myself to use spiritual jargon as long as we're on the same page around what we're trying to explain.
Yeah, I mean, my perception of channeling as an adult would be the expansiveness of the mind, right? So we have,
that's the potential. That's the concept of potential.
Right now, I have a relationship with somebody, and we're in different cities, but we're extremely deep in belief of the expansiveness of the mind, and it's unbelievable how many things can be connected at a distance. The timing and an intention and all of that. And so the idea of channeling for me, it's like, it's there's lots of possibility. I don't necessarily claim to know what's going on at every single level, but there's a sort of possibility of tapping into the residue of memory. So like when you go into a space and you feel like the vibe, like something bad happened here, or this was a sacred space, and you just feel it, like that channeling could be tapping into the sort of essence of mind beyond time, or the essence of mind, like even sharing space with you. For me, that's there's a certain amount of channeling. Like, I wouldn't learn as much by reading the book as I do from sitting across from you, hearing everything you're saying, and then also the unconscious exchange of information that may or may not be part of that sequence of events. So that's my personal perception of channeling. I don't want to go into too much depth, but the reason I brought that up was that it's this our parents grow us up with this perception of self that then also becomes a cycle, and it's some sort of a cultural cycle of some sort, right? Where now I have free will, and my free will to really own this channeling is taking my life in certain directions that breaks the culture of within the family, for example, right?
Right.
And so as somebody who's an independent researcher that was encouraged to like think intelligently, finding this particular book, like I'm sure there's many experiences, but in this example, this particular book that really affirms your inner sense of motivation and direction being important, and then so then what challenges did you face by following that direction of where you were like?
Well, first of all, one thing that I would, the reason why I think that the modern life is seen as a threat to the traditional system is precisely because it promotes creativity and creative thinking. So in a large way, I'd say moving to Canada, while it was, I find it getting less and less open as a society, but I actually found myself much more in that system because I was societally much more allowed in the Canadian system to do. Because if I had stayed either back in Serbia, or I wouldn't have raised in Turkey because we left that place a long time ago, but the same system there. And especially if you're hanging around groups of people that are trying to maintain the old traditional ways, I had a friend who was in Spain who told me that one of his friends decided to leave his wife, I think, or something like that. Just decided, like in West, the concept of divorce is just, something that's the easiest thing almost right now. It's like something you should do. If you didn't do it, what are you doing with your life? But this guy decided to leave. It's
become a part of our culture.
It's become part of, so what's right or wrong, right? This guy left and moved to another part of the town. He got fired because everybody knew him in the community. Now notice, community is your group. This is why the West is dissolving the concept of social communities. Somebody who's going to hold you accountable for whether you're following the right path, whatever that might mean. This guy got fired. Nobody talked to him anymore. He was forced to go back to his wife, even though he didn't want to, because he was so trapped within the strong Spanish, almost militant traditional societal norm system that he was just plugged back in. And that he lived, and then people snap, right? Or not. They just get very, they give up on life, whatever. But that's another thing, without getting too much into detail.
They give up on life?
Ironic, right?
Well, but, that's, it's like you stop breathing.
I think
to please other people, you stop breathing.
I think I know the movie. There's a movie exactly.
Right?
Absolutely. 100% agree. And I think I went against that grain as well.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the world in the West helped me with that, because I was able to find more people who would just trust me and believe in listening to me. Like, you need to have, you are one of them, ironically.
Amazing.
One of the
I'm honored.
But one of the rare ones. Yeah. A lot of people are not interested because it's too complicated. Most people, some get triggered by it. But just so you know, another thing that I think changed, I have to throw this on, the Bridges of Madison County movie, or the book.
I don't know.
It's okay. So it's the Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep.
Okay. It's
about a photographer who comes to take photographs of these bridges. He gets sent by National Geographic. So they made a movie. This is one movie that by the time this movie ends, I am just sobbing in tears.
Okay.
Okay. This is one of those movies that just hits my nerve, and I just cry at the end. But what really is the premise of the movie is that they meet. Her husband and family are out of town for the weekend or something like that, and they just stumble upon each other and they basically have an affair, right? But the interesting thing is that they have this unbelievable connection, and then he just leaves. And then for the rest of her life, this is like the movie and the book. Do you mind if I tell you about it?
Please.
Some people, I don't usually like to know if there's a good movie. I'm like, say no more. But for the sake of the conversation, I have to talk about it. What ended up happening was they connected on a spiritual level, to a degree that she knew she could never have in her life, in a small, U.S. town that's so locked into tradition. And then for the rest of their lives, until she dies, and her kids open the books and find her journal and read about this guy. So the entire book and the premise of what her life was about is to not having pursued her dream. In this case, being with this person, for example. And I remember watching that movie and thinking, I don't want to live a life where I've given up. I don't want to be this story. I don't want to, even though she fulfilled her duty. This is the role part. This is where it ties in perfectly. On paper, this woman raised her family. She was there for all her children and her husband, but ultimately a piece of her died the moment he left that day. And then she found out one day he died, and then she died, and that was that. And so a big part of me also sees that having a world where not only you're fortunate enough, that's another thing. I had probably enough people throughout my life that I met, and ideas and education that I got to get a glimpse in how broad these concepts are. And I had a lot of good, strong foundation out of physics about how the world works as well, right? So, but the main thing about it is that I allowed myself to not get stuck in not pursuing it, and then lamenting it for the rest of my life, and then one day someone's going to find my journal. I didn't want nobody finding my journal. I want my journal. Somehow I decided my journal to be in the open format, like such a book or what it's music or whatever it is. So that's another element.
So what you didn't want was to, die a quiet death of being silent.
That's right. I don't want to.
And what did you want?
I want to explore. I wanted to seek the truth. And this is ironically all the big, whether it's Jesus or, even Muhammad probably, and all these other people, they're all about people, technically, like Jesus was put on a cross because he went against the mainstream narrative, if you think about it. He preached love. Think about it. There's a lot of truth in a lot of things he was saying. And ironically, I have a whole section at the back that talks about, I found my own version of God and what Jesus represents through the context of this whole manuscript. And that is that for me, Jesus represents the logos, the ability to turn water into wine. In my mind, is nothing simpler than just making wine. Like the fact that we can have the ability to use
that the water fell from the sky. It made the grapes and then you took the grapes and you made the wine. You literally turned water. You turned water into wine.
Which animal does that? Right. So Jesus is the embodiment of our intellect in a way, and we're punished for it because we see the world much more and explore, and we can be scorned, and especially if you decide to push it when the rest of the society is like, no, don't do that. Like, stay in your village, fulfill your role as a wife, don't go over chasing. And notice, if she left, it might have not been as good either. That's another thing. There's always crossroads. That's why the concept of crossroads in music is always there. Because you're always, the moment you jump off the wagon and towards pursue music, the world's pretty unforgiving. They're not going to rehire you. Oh, that guy who left, you're a traitor, technically, to the mainstream narrative by becoming an artist. But for me, I see myself from that angle as technically an artist. You can call it a philosopher. I don't know. It's the granting yourself the ability to, research. Because another thing that's happening in academia, and this is why I wouldn't call myself an academic, and the reason why I never wanted to go back to academia is because I actually saw it as a place where you're plugged in just as much as you're plugged in anywhere else. Like, you're doing your research, your bit, you're also surrounded by other people who have to peer review, You have no opinion on anything else, and that's your life. You know, you'll get tenure maybe one day, blah, blah, blah. You'll be well respected if you discover something important. But my work was actually not wanting to stay in exploring one element. I wanted to look at the big picture. But in order to look at the big picture, you have to be a physicist, you have to be a biologist, you have to be a cultural scientist, you have to be an evolutionary biologist, you have to understand how so many different systems function, you have to be a psychologist, you have to understand the human brain, you have to understand human society, you have to be a sociologist, you have to be an educated, so many. But who is educated in all these things? It's almost that I've become, in a way, a jack of all trades. But because if you're a jack of all trades, you might know a bit less about everything, but you know more about everything. If that makes sense. Because you're not only learning about one thing, you're learning a bit about everything, which almost enabled me to be able to tie things in. This is why, even in the world of music, tambura rasa, ironically, the reason why I named the book Cultura Rasa is because rasa means the spice of something, the flavor of something. It's not blank slate. It's about what's underneath that builds it. So right, so tambura rasa as a band a concept was like, well, let's see what's in common in all these musical styles. Even though you can be a classical musician played exactly, I'm like, no, I want to understand what classical's about. I want to see what flamenco's about. I want to see what Balkan music's about. All of those, and then what's in common with them, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, okay, I don't have to treat all of them to the deepest ends, but I can appreciate them all for whatever I know, and then have a world of understanding of music in general, or cultures in the world in general. So that's sort of my angle in this entire thing.
I like, actually, that what you're giving me a new perspective on the tabula rasa concept. In that, you know, let's say you were to like have you know, a pan that you've been cooking stuff in, and you cook a bunch of spices, and you get rid of everything, and now you've got this pan that has all the spice flavor on it. If you cook something on it, it's a blank slate, but it has this sort of foundation of spice. That's
why when you're born, you're not a blank slate, because you're driven by your genetic needs. Similarly, when you're born into a societal system, similarly, if you create a societal group like the socials that we're doing, you're dealing with people. You're dealing with people who have their own batches, because it's all about, for me, an emergent system. If you have one individual with their needs, then you can attend to that, or think of the individual as one entity. When you have 100 people, the concept of the individual disappears when you're looking at what the rules of that, or the norms of that society are, and then you think of the society not whether that person's sad or not, but whether overall the group is satisfied or not, or whether they're fulfilling their roles or not. And you cannot look at both at the same time, because they're in different emergent systems. It's sort of like saying, you know, I'll take this hammer and I'll knock off that rock. You can't say that about a mountain. You can't knock off a mountain with one rock, because that's a collection of millions of rocks or whatever, right? Like, so you have to think of a mountain. So the concept of a hammer is not really in the emergent context of the mountain, if that makes sense. Similarly, the larger societies are, I started thinking, okay, we have to look at societies for what their purpose is, not for the purpose, even though the purpose emerges out of the individuals. That's the ultimate kind of brain twist that one needs to get used to understanding that it's both a chemical reaction, all of it, and it's also biochemical by definition, because it functions. And what I've done in the writing, because there's no terminologies like this in the cultural systems, I've said that routines, I call them routines and habits. We can find other words, but what I've done is a routine is something that you'll do if you're just in the woods by yourself. You cannot not decide to go for a walk, or have to eat, or have to do this and that. The moment you have a bunch of people where you're like, okay, now that we have that garden over there, we have to tend to it, then you're creating a habit. It's a bit clunky term, but we can use whatever terms, but I've separated them. So for me, a routine is a chemical reaction, a habit is a biochemical reaction. They're the same thing. Like a routine and a habit is the same thing. You're doing the same thing over and over again. A habit, you can call it a social routine. That would be probably an easier. I just called it habit just because I needed a word. But for me, a social routine is something, or a cultural routine is something you would do anyways. Like a chemical reaction will happen, make itself in any system regardless, because that's.
I get up in the morning, I go to sleep at night.
Yeah, but if you get sent off to a boarding school, they'll tell you when to get up. So now you're in a socialized routine. Your routine's being harnessed is actually the new word. I'm working on the new book, smaller version, to explain these concepts.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of calling it maybe harnessing culture. No, harnessing life. No, culture is a harnesser of life.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay, so what it's doing is that it's taking something that'll do something anyways, and it's making it do something that it wants.
Yeah, it's the container.
It's the container, right? And it's nothing wrong with it, but if you're born with a predisposition of not wanting to, if you're not a type, this is why it's funny, like the concept of Aspergerism, right, is a person who doesn't catch social cues as well, right? So Asperger's are technically individuals that would ultimately, especially autistic, because that's the spectrum, right? Depending on how much you go into that spectrum, are people who would actually that's probably another reason why I could delve into these things, because in that spectrum I'm actually okay on ruminating on these things just by myself. I actually don't need somebody else to validate this, technically, although I love talking about it. But what I realized is that people who are born as Asperger's means that their genetic expression of catching social cues, which is such a big important thing, a human trait, is actually less pronounced. It's still there, it's just less pronounced. But notice that if our cultural systems start catering to the isolated ways, which is what's happening in the Western and modern worlds predominantly, then they can start rubbing wrongly the people who are not born Asperger's to that degree. Because we are all a cocktail of hormones. We're all, to a degree, something.
Yeah.
That person's horny, that person's more aggressive, that person's intellect, that person likes to run, whatever it is. We all have a certain amount, we're just pronounced. But if a society takes one trait and starts pushing it, then there's always going to be a certain amount of people who are not getting it. And that's the discrepancy that I like to look at, is that and that's nonviolent communication with Marshall Rosenberg. His stance was always, how do you create a system where you can get all the needs met? And some people say, well, you can never get all the needs met. Well, you can increase the rate of needs being met, and I think that ultimately is my challenge, and what I'd like to have in my world, in my societies, is not that I don't want to conform and do what's told. I love being part of a system and following rules. I just want the rules to be justified and also be as openly available for everyone. This, I think, starts tying into the questions that you were asking me about how do you create a system within a very disconnected society about things. And I'm thinking by finding which needs are unmet and then creating a club or a pod or something to just bring that up, and then hopefully use it as a further blueprint to creating more avenues for getting broader and ironically, all of the LGBT movements, all of the Me Too movements, they're all in the name of that.
Yeah.
But we also have to be careful when they, women have rights, like legally. When it comes, how I was saying rule of thumb, rules, and then laws, women have full legal rights to get a job, to get divorced if they want, all of that. So technically, all that's left is bigotry. So you can scream at bigots, but legally, you are totally, we've done it. So it's almost like we need to just now learn how to.
Do we trust it now?
Well, so how do you maintain a system once the laws are put into place?
Because the argument would probably be like, well, I don't trust the judge not to be a bigot.
So, but that's the problem. That's the same thing with the whole COVID stuff. Like when you go to a place, it's like you're dealing with a person who's been ordered to have to ask you for passes, for example.
Yeah.
Are they thinking that that's justified or not? How are they going to deal with you? So you're always dealing with it. But what I'm saying is that what can also happen, and I find with a lot of these movements, is they start labeling beyond the scope of what they've achieved. And I think unfortunately, I think that's being fueled by various entities who are trying to, kind of destroy the Western system. That's my take on it. That's a rabbit hole of its own.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, there's definitely rumblings of people who don't trust the justice system, and it's to, you know, I don't know, is it something that's being created as a form of dismantling trust? Or is it something that is, you know, this is where we're at? And I mean, it's probably a combination of both.
Should
right?
we trust our governments about COVID? Should we or should we not?
Yeah,
like, that's the stance.
But then the other argument would be like, okay, so right now there is a constitutional case that's going through the courts in BC that is proving, or at least their argument is that there was never a state of emergency and that the response was totally overblown, etc. So, but the question then becomes, if it is able to be proven that that is in fact true, is the judge themselves going to honor that, right?
That's exactly right.
And so do we trust the justice system so much that we trust the judges in these situations? Like, to go back to, like, say, women's rights, do we trust the judge not to be a bigot, right?
What I used to always love, what I always loved about Canada when I moved here, at least some of the concepts and the memes that were floating around, was this general trust that people will do in the name of the well-being of everyone. And I feel that with this whole COVID thing, a lot of people are getting taken for a ride because they're actually just inherently, technically naively, almost too trusting. This is a perfect example. Because I actually think, yes, we should trust the judge, but you know, like I always say, it's like if any adversity in the world out there is strong and big enough to affect our societies very negatively, I'm all about following the rules. It's just that this one specific one seems completely unjustified, but it's presented as being like really large threat. So that's the hypocrisy. That's the discrepancy that, for me, I look at it. So and it would have come like when I think of marriage, back in the days when people lived in small societies, you're on a farm. You need somebody to maintain the farm system, and considering that unborn life was very much valued back then. So by the sheer design of that societal meme, you should have a lot of children. There's still push even for me, having had one child. I still, even with the free world we live in, I still am constantly pressured to have more children, by the way. Whether I like it, that's another meme. But what I'm thinking is that back in those days, if you live on a farm, it's like, okay, somebody's going to go out there and plow, and somebody has to stay and take care of 6 children. We need to delegate. Okay, well, let's have all the men stay in and all the women go out. Women would have said no to that within that context. What happened with the modern world, all of a sudden you can sit in a chair and make millions. Anyone can do that, women included. So all of a sudden what might have worked and had to be the only alternative of, you know, women staying at in the kitchen, which, by the way, is not in the kitchen. They're taking care of the family. Of the home, like they're taking care of life, whereas the man is just providing sustenance and all that, right? So within that context, it would have worked. The moment you step outside of it, into a new societal system of a larger system, now you can knock it down and say it's patriarchy, right? And I'm like, yeah, in that context, it doesn't work, but that doesn't mean that that societal system wouldn't work like a charm if you were stuck in the middle of nowhere with just your wife and a bunch of children. And a few other people. You would have probably, and whenever you watch, and this is how I found this, is that I went and watched Inuit videos because I wanted to learn about small societal systems. So I researched all the small societal as much as I could find. Wow. It's all in the book. Yeah. And the Inuits, it's like the division between what women and men do is just razor sharp. You go to, Hawaii or Kauai, we were there, watched the system. Division. Women are here doing this, men are, and it's like anytime you go to a smaller thing, it almost by design gets separated because you have to survive. But when you're in a large system where everyone's pampered, you don't have to survive. So it's unfair towards women to implement that, and technically it's unfair towards men not to be stay-at-home. That's another thing that's forgotten. There's a lot of men that maybe don't want to work. Like, I love the fact that, and this is ironically one of the perks of since COVID started, is that our schedules have become flexible enough that I can actually be a father. And I love that. And I would have been denied that if I had to be just sent off to work, right? And many people are. They don't raise their children, strangers. And now that women and men are in the workforce, long live workforce and, freedom. But children are being raised by other people now. So, and that is a threat. This is why all the traditionals and religious people are rising up against this new modern movement, because it's a direct threat to the family structure, directly from that angle. And it's whose fault is it? Who's right? Who's wrong? Well, it depends how you want to live. Anyways, you see the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
I'll just throw another final thought about that last thought that I had. For a person who's just born, you don't know whether, once by the time you're 70, if you've spent 50 years in isolation by yourself, living with no families and no offspring, no one in your life that you trust, you have no idea. We have no idea what kind of mental torments that might come with.
Yeah.
Right? So when somebody comes to you and says you have to have the 5 children and a big family, I don't care whether you like it or not, trust me, you'll thank me in 50 years. How do you know? How do you know whether that person is right or not? You haven't lived until you're 50, 60, 70 years old, right? So that's where the almost leap of faith comes, or it could be termed as in it's tested. You just don't know it until, and this is a once in a lifetime situation where you will only know once in your life whether you've created. This is why I am so adamant about creating environments with people around me who are respectful, who want to listen to what I have to say because I want to listen to what they have to say, and living my life further like that. This is where the blue zones, the guys who did on people who live under 100 years old, there's one of the big traits beside drinking a glass of wine and moving all the time, right? Not being sedentary too much.
But living over 100 years?
Yeah. So you might have heard there was a TED Talk some years ago about a guy who went and found different societies.
Yes, I think I watched that.
So he found similar traits. One of those traits, besides the ones I just mentioned, was they had 12 close friends in their life. That to me is family. It doesn't have to be related genetically to you. You have to have somebody...
Cultural family.
Your pod of people where you can be yourself. And that's the free will. You can exercise your free will even though you're still working to be within society. But it's both. Really. Anyways,
but you have your own micro societies within that pod.
And the fulfillment that you'll reach, and I'm convinced by this right now as I get older, as I see how I feel in my own mind, and that's why I'm pursuing all that more, is because I've found is that more I'm around people who respect me and I respect them back, is that kind of a system is for psychologically so much better for me, and I think for many people. So that's what I'm exploring really for.
So I want to take that example. So if you have 12 people that were super interested in learning this book and the philosophy that you're outlining in it, what kind of tangible results do you think that how would they see the world differently and interact with the world? How would their philosophy be inspiring to... I guess I want to know, if you can imagine people really learning your book, how that would change the way that they interact with one another.
I think ultimately is ironically just what I said. I think people would end up respecting each other more. And the reason why I say that is because it would almost give yourself a larger allowance to think of yourself as having agency in the world, because you're a living, breathing being with needs that shapes the culture. Because a lot of times when we think about, a lot of people are caught up in this kind of science will give us all answers, rationality will give us all the answers, so just follow that. And I'm thinking, no, that misses such a huge scope of human breadth of existence, really. So I think by one of the things that I tie back into this whole conversation that I haven't even mentioned in this case is this area right here, which is the building blocks of life are the 6, let's say, but plus main, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, those schnapps, as they call them, atoms, are basically I don't know, I might miss the percentage, but 95% of you are just those 6 elements. That's it. The rest are minerals that are holding the whole thing together, right? And the way those 6, elements interact with each other emerges life. Similarly, there's certain biological expressions in us that that help shape our cultural systems. And I think that, and so what I've outlined in there, you can see right here, well, first of all, is the mere fact that MIOF, I called it, is the movement, emotions, objective experiences, and feelings, which is basically the loop. I move my hand, okay? You can objectively see my hand moving, right? So that would go from a movement into objective experiences, right? So you have something that you can objectively experience, but then there is your emotions of how you're emoting something, and then how you feel inside. So there's all sorts of, and all of these systems, by the way, are separate systems in our nervous system. They're independent, but they all work in a flow together, right? But the biggest one that I also, this is somewhat complicated, but I want to point out these top ones, which is the ability to have ethos, pathos, and logos, which is, we have, let me unpack this really quickly, and then I'll answer your question through that. So the ability to imitate, ethos, pathos, and logos are old philosophical terms, and I actually think that they're very correct if you want to kind of understand it in kind of layman terms of what's going on. So when I imitate you, when you and I imitate each other, it's predominantly functioning in the objective world between us. Imitation, by definition, is I move my hand, you move your hand. Let's walk this way, and then there's like different pared down versions that I have to research, which is moving in the direction of. So you're not really, that's emulation. So there's like
you laugh a certain way, I copy that.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, but hang on, this is leaking now into the emotional imitation, and I'll get to that, right? Okay, but exactly, that's part of the direct imitation that we just do. And what's interesting, and you see it in our children, they do it to a T. They imitate, like, it's unbelievable how good they become. And that, for me, just like ribosomes can replicate the DNA into proteins perfectly every time, it's always the same, and that ribosome machinery is in charge of making sure that it's always replicated the same way. Similarly, our mirror neurons, which is another element of our neural circuitry in line of everything that we're doing, is essential in us being able to deliver the repetitive element to as perfectly replicated as possible, which creates culture, really, right? Bees do it with their wiggle dances. They wiggle here, wiggle there. They're just insects. They do it. So that's that imitation element, and that makes, in my mind, bees have culture from that element. What we're now, that's something that insects and all of us have in common. What mammals develop, because we have larger amygdalas, or limbic systems, let's call it, the limbic system has given rise to another imitative zone, because we imitate everything, and that is our emotions. And so, even though, again, just like you can call chemical biochemical, it's all imitation, but it's smartly separated, because what I do with my hand like this carries different weight from when I emote with an emotion. If I get angry, that'll work you up. If I get anxious, it'll work you up. If I get sad, it'll work. So that imitation of the actual, through the limbic system imitation, is what I would call empathy. And notice, empathy is very, very neglected in our societies to a large degree. You have to learn about it. Nobody even thinks about it very much in terms of how much we imitate empathically amongst each other. So it's a separate system. And then there's the third system, which is syntax, I call it.
Okay.
Syntax is so empathy would be the pathos. And then you have logos, which is the ability of me to say a sentence right now, whatever it is, and for you to perfectly repeat the sentence. So you're not imitating movement, you're not imitating emotion, you're imitating a stream of concepts that I created in
but not just,
my
but maybe not
neocortex.
Just, maybe not just imitating the sounds, but actually understanding it.
That is
imitating logic.
Exactly. So that is logos. We are imitating not the movement of a physical hand, but we're imitating the concepts in our brains. And that is language, right? That is why humans are so special, because we take that to a whole new level. Many animals are able to do. Now, my point here.
Wow.
Now, to tie it back in, my point is, traditionally in philosophy, these three, ethos, pathos, logos, are literally defined as modes of persuasion. Modes of persuasion.
That's so interesting.
Which means you can persuade by just having strong ethos. If I walk in all properly dressed up, and ethos is, I'm realizing, being given by other people. You don't really, like, ethos will say that person over there. Just the pointing of the finger is like, listen to that guy. That guy didn't emote anything, he didn't say anything, but the sheer, like, somebody giving you the agency without saying much, even emotionally, gives you, like, there's crossovers, of course.
It's like the experiment where everybody's in the room and they get up.
You just do what everyone, yeah, exactly. Or the monkeys with the bananas. That's another one. That's the one where they put them, it's a bad one because they punish them by picking up the banana, by throwing water. It's the same thing, really.
Yeah, okay.
The second one is to win an argument through sheer emotion. And I think, unfortunately, that the emotional arguments, especially in the woke culture, in the cancel culture, is rampant right now. So there... but
if I'm stronger, louder, and
that's right.
and more aggressive, then I win.
Yeah, or you cry if you're on that podium, right?
Right.
And you cry, oh my God.
So then you collapse.
Right, and then everyone feels sorry.
You're the victim.
And then you win the argument through that.
Right.
And then there's the logos, which you can and frame your argument really well. And for the fact that in modern world we're all so much about promoting the rationality, I think what's lost, and I think this will lead me into your question of what people will benefit, is that I think the fact that we have given so much agency and priority to saying that rationality, the logos of us thinking of some idea in our heads and explaining to you because we have science by our side to show, documentation and this and that, has become so dominant that we've kind of forgotten about how to control our emotions even. We've become so volatile at each other. And I think that we need to respect...
Control or even more so, I would just throw this out there, organize that.
Or use to our advantage as an agent to win the argument, right? So I think we're out of balance with this whole thing. The left is out of balance with the right because in my mind, it's not about whether the woman should stay in the kitchen or not. It's about the role of the kitchen. Somebody has to stay in the kitchen. Right?
Somebody's got to cook.
They're making it. This is what I don't like about these divisive narratives. It's not about. It's about we have to fulfill the roles, people. In the meantime,
somebody has to clean the bathroom.
Somebody has to clean the bathrooms, and somebody has to go and work all day. That's not pleasant. Many people hate their work and jobs. Some people actually. Many women find that they want to be mothers once they become mothers. They don't want to be in the workforce, and all of a sudden, because the modern world has made the woman have to be so dominant in the workforce and have a career, many women are like, but what if do they have a choice if they just want to be a mother?
And then it builds resentment.
So you see, we're totally out of balance, and unfortunately I think what's happening, there's a lot of, everything's steeped in division, and I think it's because we're out of balance of knowing how to use our logos, ethos, and pathos, and ultimately it comes down to respecting. And I think if I have an opinion, this is why hierarchy all on its own doesn't work. And I found out that we've landed ourselves in sort of like everyone telling everyone else to do, but nobody's really listening to whether somebody might be saying, hang on, maybe
don't walk off the cliff.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
But they told me to.
Yeah. But it's also when somebody has an opinion that is not being considered and they just might have a point.
Yeah.
And then they get shunned and thrown out of society through emotions, really. So for me, it's about really achieving the balance by seeing how we are human, because ultimately it's a futility to realize that we ultimately care about our tribe, and we can't help but have us versus them built into us. And the best we can do is try to keep it at bay. You know, and you can't keep it at bay if your hubris, your self-confidence is so big that you just automatically start pointing fingers. So as much as we're living in this free modern world, I actually find it very, very repressed So it's so many levels, on so many levels.
So do you feel like having the knowledge of the inner workings in relationship to biological science would give us the confidence to be more involved in our cultural processes?
Totally. Oh, another thing you actually reminded me with this. Let's talk about the world of LGBT, for example. Like, for example, we know that when you go downtown in a specific neighborhood, that's the area where there's a lot of people from the LGBT community would live in.
Sure.
Right? You can say similarly with musicians. There's an area.
Right. We got the creative, like Commercial Drive. You've got Davie Street.
Wherever it is.
Different cultures, right. And they kind of come together in clusters.
Or you'll have business offices for people who just want to work their asses off, right? Now, let's stick to the LGBT world. Now, what I've realized, and this is the challenging, how to which degree. So once you found out that you have a meme that you want to implement to support somebody's needs, once you have a need that you think is neglected, then you create a meme, a rule, a law, a should that should be done. And one example is people who were not born in a way where they identify as a he or a she. Actually, so this is more in the pronoun domain. This
is what's happening right now.
Right. So now, what I think personally, in terms of how to handle, for example, implementation of this meme, and how I think it's being implemented not quite rightly, personally, is that I think that, and I can tie this to the musicians as well. If you want to be loud and go throw a huge party somewhere, you should be allowed to within your club, and the rest of the world should respect that.
Yeah.
However, the rest of the world should not respect for you to barge into some gala and just start singing out loud and interrupt the whole thing because they have a function. This is why I was actually very pissed off when I watched the movie Hair. Did you watch the movie Hair?
No, I never did.
Don't watch music. Well, music's good. Whatever. It's a hippie movie.
You're like, well, don't.
If you want to learn about hippie culture, you would, because there's that moment where he literally does that. He actually walks into some building like Borat style, right? Although Borat was a joke, whereas they were making a point. They're like, I can do whatever I want, and he jumps and gets onto the table.
I mean, I would argue though that Borat was also making that point too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The same point.
Yeah, however, totally.
It's posed as a joke, but he's doing it in real life, and so therefore it becomes the same thing.
No, but the only thing.
But I see what you're saying.
No. The main difference is that Borat left it as a joke, whereas when they leave in the movie that place, and they get kicked out, he's like, look at these snobs. I can be able to do whatever I want. Like, he still had that confidence that his freedom that he's assigned to himself as a hippie that he just deserves now needs to be implemented across board. And my answer is no, you can't expect that. You just can't. Just like I, as a tall person, can't expect that the whole world will be built for my size. What I could go for is to say, can we have an area somewhere where everything's bigger so that tall people can go and enjoy it? And that's why I'm very disheartened when I used to be in like office meetings and they make every single person have to pronounce their pronoun and say I'm he, him. And I'm thinking, no, hang on, let's take a big step back. Let's not leak into the wider society. The reason why is because, and this is the futility of biology. And that is cultures, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you want to see it, this is why it's a relative term. This is why I would agree with the relativists to some degree, is that we're all born with a large expressed trait to some degree of some sort, whether tallness, whether it's smarts, whether it's how aggressive, any of those, whether it's sexual orientation. And I think there'll always be people on the peripheries, the minorities that everybody talks about, who also deserve to be heard. And that's why you see in traditional systems, what they do is they only focus on the majority. Right? They're like, screw the rest. So keep them in the cupboards, quite literally, back in the days. We just man, woman, and if you're gay, just pretend you're a man, have children, because we need children for the tradition, right? Shut up and do your bit. Do your role.
Yeah.
Back to roles.
Right.
What the modern world has done is that it successfully managed to recognize, and I love that, they've successfully managed to recognize, but what they've done is that now they're creating laws where they have to make everyone else have to recognize that they're... My point is, you don't have to make the person have to say, I'm he or he, legally, or something like that.
You could still respect them without that.
You can, the further point is, when you are in the downtown area where it's known that that area, just like there's an area that accepts musicians to play, just like there's people, if you make a place where it's for tall people, which doesn't exist, by the way, really, unless you just go into nature. That's why I like nature, probably. Nice tall trees. I feel at home. But I think if you go in a world where there's people who are in the minorities of sexual orientation, there should be 100% respect for them there.
Yeah.
When you're outside, out of that world, you should talk with other people with respect towards, with respect.
Yeah.
Towards those people. But I don't think that that norm should be imposed onto the majority of people who simply don't identify like that, which is scientifically provable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So
yeah,
I think we the way to solve these issues is to create a lot of pods where people can get their needs met, but not allow the pods to leak into the white system, because it's not fair for people who were not born without
in your group
identifying as a male if they're born as a male, which is 99% or whatever, or 90 whatever percent.
In your group of people, if that is something that's important to you to share with the group, in that the for example the pronouns that you're talking about, then by all means, like, that is part of the culture of the group. What I feel like you're talking about when it leaks into the larger culture,
that's right,
is it sort of alienates the majority.
That's right.
Right? And then it becomes something that's very difficult to dance with, because it's not really part of your dance.
The futility is that minorities will unfortunately always be minorities, and cultural systems have to attend to majorities in order to keep the social order and the roles within social context well functioning. It's impersonal. It's not like the fact that we've even reached the point to address. This is why I think that the movements are great, but what I find is that the movements are being pumped up to be much more invasive into the larger populace than they should be. That's my issue with them.
And I mean, in this concept of small groups of people having their own cultures, right? Everybody's part of some kind of a minority.
100%.
Right? Like, everybody has something that's unique to their experience, that's unique to the way they want to live, that's unique to the way they breathe their own life, that is in the minority. And in the small groups, that creates a place where that can exist within the context of a larger culture.
That's right.
And so with the book, the benefit is that you could see how you can create a culture that represents you and the minority group that you're a part of, that doesn't have to represent the whole entire
That's
everybody.
why you have swingers clubs for people who want to explore sexuality, because humans are superbly sexual beings. That's why you have hunting clubs, because you have humans who are born. We are animals. We have to survive. We have a need. Our need is to go out there and have to be able to confront and technically murder if it comes down to it. Now, hunting for game is built into our system, right? So if someone wants to explore that and put their own food onto their own table, then you have clubs for that. Now, whether to which degree that's pushed and how that's managed is something that we just have to figure out societally.
Right, but that there are I'm saying there are these minority groups that we're all a part of on some level.
That's right.
And instead of saying, let's take the whole entire organism of culture and make it appeal to these minority sections.
Yes, that's a mistake.
That's the mistake.
I think that's the mistake.
Why don't we just create our groups of people that serve the minority groups?
And merely teach the people outside of those groups to just be respectful. But here's the argument
how to have respect for,
but here's the argument against, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the argument against is, well, now you're going to have some Nazi group over there forming. should they be allowed an opinion? Somebody who thinks that, white race is the best. You see, and that's how you throw the bath out with the baby out with the bathwater, right?
You can't have
right. So this is the distinction.
Both.
Well, this distinction that you would draw in this case with somebody who's against another ethnic group is that they're actually not promoting wanting to get their needs met, but they're wanting to promote that they want their, biological traits to be pushed. Which ironically,
or they're in direct conflict and disrespect to other people's needs.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So one would beg the question: is that should I be allowed to create a club where I can sit and say, where we're tall people here and we're the best, and the rest of people who are not tall just suck? And notice. The way I just thought of it, the way I would tackle.
There's a difference between like wanting to harm them and just thinking they suck.
That's exactly the right. So the argument becomes just as much as the larger society has to respect the minorities, whether it be some blue-eyed guy who wants the rest of them to just drop dead, needs to be respectful for the other people as well.
Right.
So it's ultimately, that's why I keep going back to the respect element. I think this entire process has really taught me about how to take a step back and actually recognize ourselves as fellow bilaterals. We are just
I'm
animals.
The right eye, you're the left eye. You go do your job, I go do mine. I'll look in that direction, you look in that direction.
Exactly. I think it helps find what I've successfully managed to do with this writing is to be able to open up concepts to a point where you can really easily find commonalities with pretty much any other human person that you ever meet.
Yeah.
Very easily, no matter how different they are. No matter what they are, and how to be inclusive of anyone, and then you still have to deal with them if they're, rubbing you wrong or whatever that means. But ultimately, you have to learn to respect and coexist. That's, I think, the result of the whole thing. Ultimately, we're just scratching the surface, man.
I know. I feel like that's a really good place to kind of like tie it up.
Thanks for meeting about this. I mean, your curiosity got me really wanting to talk about it, and I could talk for days about this.
I hear that. Yeah.
And I know that you're involved. I know that you're directly involved yourself in wanting to create communities on an educational level as well, which is a noble cause for a society as well, right?
Yeah. So and I mean that's the whole idea of people coming together in small groups, and the fact that you're seeing the value in that, and that really your book gives context for that too.
Fully.
Yeah, it's really important.
Because it explores all of those societal structures, and I'm realizing of how much weight really the family group has. And when I say family group, that can be your, stamp collectors club. It doesn't have to be biological family. Like like the larger system that you follow the rules of is something that we didn't evolve, really. We were very good with following hierarchical structure because ultimately you're still getting orders from those 300 people in the federal government. They're still just one entity. It's just that they've decided to put rules, cookie cutter rules across the entire spectrum of millions of people. Anytime, and this is why I think COVID has also been very mishandled, because anytime you decide to, this is why I was always struggling when people will say, well, it's just like the seatbelt, and I'm like, no, like anytime we decide to make any kind of a meme across board of millions of people by a group of, federal few hundred people, like Gates is now wanting to have 2,000 to 3,000 people at the WHO make decisions for an entire planet. Think about that. That means
194 countries.
Well, that's no different from saying, well, okay, the average height of a human is, such and such, and which is technically what we're doing, but you make it so much that everything is the size. Every car is the small size that I would never personally be able to fit in.
Right.
Because, and that is the cookie cutter solution across the millions, whereas this is one solution.
Yeah.
And every time we decide to do anything like that, because a seatbelt is on and off, it's a no-brainer, really, it's easy.
Yeah.
But anytime we decide to do anything else where we want to implement across entire societies, I think we should take it super seriously, and I just think that in COVID case, we didn't take anything seriously. We just implemented it because
we took the fear and the feeling of being afraid seriously,
which is the pathos out of hand. And that's why when I talk to people, I'm like, I can't rationalize with you because we need to first come to terms. And I always say it's that ethical argument ultimately, it relies on all of them. The ethos, pathos, logos they're all equally available to make your argument and to win an argument. But I think you cannot allow the emotional to dominate.
Yeah.
The rational needs to come back, and considering that we pride ourselves to be in a smart, rational societal system, I'm actually quite disappointed of how much we're allowing our emotions to really dictate so much of these like cross-board legality implementations that we're doing. And I think it's a slippery slope that we might regret and not be able to bounce back off of very easily.
Well, I mean, this is a wake-up call, right? Like, this is the wake-up call of our generation. Yeah. Like, we didn't see this coming, but here it is, and you can look back and say, well, I might not have seen it coming, but this was where we were going.
One could also beg the question that any very, very, very large societal system is bound to have a big war every 50 years. Because sooner or later, this discrepancy between, because notice it builds up. Like even the Second World War took 8 years to build up. We're only 2 years in here in 2020.
Well, and I would argue that we haven't actually fully accepted and grieved what happened in the Second World War. Like, you know, there's a lot of sweeping things under the carpet.
But here's the problem.
That ends up where we are.
So here's
today.
yet another futility. I mean, there's so many elements. There's another futility, and that is that unfortunately, we don't live 1,000 years.
Right. So we don't know.
We literally are naive. Every generation is completely innocent and naive, and they literally cannot go through the pains of people who sat in trenches or died in the bombings of all sorts. Like, you don't know. And Canada, by and large, has been a very peaceful country. So people who were raised in Canada just think that peace is just the norm. And I'm thinking, be careful with that thought, because you don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. We might have, in 5 years, not now, in 5 years we might have a World War III on our hands if we don't smarten up.
Well, I mean, this is the
it might be inevitable. It might be completely inevitable.
We are already experiencing that. Like, I mean, think about the term that had been tossed around, terrorism, right? Feel like there is no better word to describe what I have been experiencing other than terrorism. Like, the expression of what's happened in my life as a result of everything is pure terror. Especially having a child going through this and having, situations in my own personal life and stuff. It's terror. It's like, and then and it's in every single thing. Like, even think about the television and movies, that the severe psychological and violence how much it's come into our face of, like, this is what we're showing ourselves, or what's being shown to us.
While being isolated on your computer.
While being isolated. Yeah. Like, it's a multi-pronged psychological warfare that ultimately, I would have never known what terrorism was like. Now I think I know. I think this is terrorism, because it's not a war like someone's pointing a gun in your face and you're scared for your death, and then when you leave that situation you're like, okay, you can make certain safety adjustments to this. Is like consistent. It's consistent. It's everywhere. It's at every turn. You're in a situation where people are confronting you head on. I got yelled at in a store, like things like that, where it's like everywhere around you. And so to me, like,
everyone's reactive.
Everyone's reactive, and maybe there's a part of it that I'm feeling like we don't really truly respect and have not fully digested how we came to World War II, which is why we're able to come to this place here, where, if we really had respect for how that came to be, and we're not just sweeping it under the rug, like, the past is the past, it's never happen again. Like, that's a very blind way to look at
How
things.
does one learn the lesson properly? By reading a history book, because you can't read it through personal experience. You have to. This is where culture yet again can be helpful if one allows themselves. If not, then you're going from scratch, and you'll make the same mistakes 100% all over again. And if people are kept ignorant, and they're just told what to do without being able to raise a question, especially when they start noticing there's something in off, especially if their grandfather or whatever tells them, listen, this is a bad idea. From what I remember, unless we're able to somehow translate that into the present from the past, and that takes work. Most people won't necessarily do the work, and this is work.
Yeah, it is. It is work.
Anyways, Michael,
that was awesome.
Hi everyone.